Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. This is the first in a two-part series. I don't know if you can have a series of two parts, but we're going to do it anyway. A two-part series of mysteries, and we're going to do today Mysteries of Westeros, and then next week, because it's been a little while since we've done a Lord of the Rings live stream, we're going to do Mysteries of Middle-earth. So basically what I did was I asked my patrons just to tell me what their favorite mysteries were in the world, in the story, and then I'll talk about them for a bit. But I will very happily also take comments, thoughts, questions in the chat as well as we are going on. So let's get into it. James Horner saying, hello, Robert. Thanks again for creating this positive space. Well, thank you very much. The positive space is as much as anyone else. I'm going to start out with a shout out to the moderators straight away. That is down to them as much as anything else. If you are watching this live, if you're here early, the moderators have been here for a little while saying hi to you. Say hi back and just give them a little bit of love. They do an amazing job. Anyway, I've been curious about Hardhome, says James Horner. How could such a large settlement exist in such a hostile environment? Then there is the mystery of what happened to it. Do you think Valyria could have been involved, given that it was completely destroyed with fire? Okay, so Hardhome. You will remember Hardhome, I'm sure, from the TV show. The main thing that happened, the wildlings had gathered there, and then Jon and some of the Night's Watch go up there to try and rescue them, but then the army of the dead arrive, and there's some pretty epic battles, and then you get that kind of face-off between Jon and the Night King, as Jon's on the boat sort of drifting away, and the Night King's there, just there on the quay staring at him. So that's Hardhome. Now, in the books, we haven't quite got to that. The story's kind of moved in a slightly different direction. Jon is not going up there, but that's all for the future, really. Looking at the past of it, this was, according to the World of Ice and Fire, the closest that the wildlings ever got to a town, the equivalent of things that there would be south of the wall. Mostly the wildlings, although the wildlings are very different, they have different cultures, they have different tribes, different groups. They mostly live in quite small communities. Hardhome was the largest of those, a kind of a gathering place. It was on the coast. They had as far as we can tell, a sort of a small trading kind of business going on. There was obviously fishing, and around this area, this coastal area, there was these cliffs. In the cliffs were these caves, and people would live both in buildings around the sort of the harbour area and also in the caves. And this was a significant enough place that at least one maester went up there just to do, as maesters do, just to investigate, to write down their findings and so on. And this is the mystery, because so far so understandable, so ordinary. But then one night, 600 years before the story, so we're now talking 200 years before the Doom of Valyria, suddenly it erupted. We don't know the details. We just know that even from south of the wall, they could see this kind of like fire on the horizon. The sky was lit up. And then when people got there, the whole place was burnt out. And they could hear from those caves on the mountainside, on the cliffside, there was these screams coming out. And we're told that what was left were ghouls and things like that, all kind of horrific. Any survivors from this, it would appear, people from, I think, Skagos came up and took them as slaves. Basically, the whole place got wiped out. So where we're at in the current story is that, yes, this is being used as a kind of like a haven for a lot of the wildlings. It's not the kind of place you'd go out of choice. But the mystery is, what on earth happened? What happened 600 years ago? And James says, is it something to do with Valyria, given that it was completely destroyed with fire? Well, this is the sort of prevailing theory. I wouldn't say prevailing theory. This is the theory that has had most traction within the fandom, which is that the timing here, this is the height of the Valyrian freehold. And of all of Valyria, of all of Essos that's sort of holding out, um, there's one place in particular that is quite a sore spot for the Valyrians. This is Braavos. Braavos was formed by some slaves who escaped. They managed to capture ships, head up to. They found this big sort of bay area, really, with lots of islands on, hidden by the mists, and they formed their own community. People coming from hundreds, thousands of different cultures, but united in the fact that they were former slaves and they'd escaped the Valyrian freehold. And they prospered. It took them time, but they prospered. But this was the secret city, and they didn't let anybody know where they were. So obviously, Valyria were hunting for it. So the theory goes, we have fire and flames, we have the destruction of a place. Might this be the Valyrians thinking that they found Braavos, destroying it, and then we now discover that it wasn't Braavos, and not sort of telling people about it because it was a little bit embarrassing? I mean, possibly. It's possibly the case, but it doesn't really explain the kind of spooky elements about what's going on there. The cries and screams, what must have been weeks or months later, still emanating from those caves, of the ghouls and undead walking around afterwards. This seems to be fire, but magical. Some sort of dark magic was going on there. So, personally, I suspect probably not Valyrians. Probably this is one of those things. I suspect actually George R. R. Martin hasn't got an answer for this. It particularly worked up. I don't think this is central to the plot. This is just a bit of interesting backstory. But probably this is some kind of dark magic, fire magic, which happened 600 years ago and just went very wrong. The kind of equivalent of what happened at Summerhall, which we'll talk about a bit later as another interesting mystery in this world. But this happened north of the wall, and we don't have any eyewitnesses, and we don't know. So, yeah, it's a mystery. And George R. R. Martin, and I should probably say, we're talking about mysteries through this, and the reason why they're mysteries is that they don't have a clear answer to what happened. And I think this is a classic example of that, because there's a theory that a lot of the people have that doesn't quite fit the facts. There's another one, which is what I've just set out, which kind of does fit the facts, but means that it's not really hugely relevant to the story unless suddenly it does become it. But it would only happen if then George R. R. Martin gives us a whole load of extra information. So we simply do not know right now, and we cannot know right now. Okay, let's go into the chat. Mary Lou Gambit, new member, thank you so much. Hugely appreciate that. And Hug also gifted one live stream membership. So thank you very much for those. If you do wish to support this channel, thank you. First of all, the best way to do that is always via Patreon. And when I say that, it's because last time I checked, Patreon takes something like 3% of the money that you pay across. YouTube channel membership takes, I think it's 30%. So it's quite a big difference. So the most cost-effective way to do it is via Patreon. But if you don't want to go via Patreon for whatever reason, then a channel membership here I still hugely appreciate. So thank you very much indeed for that. Just having a quick flick through the chat. Karl Karsnark talking about earthquakes, volcanoes, lava tunnels, etc. They can happen in snowy and or sandy places. Yep, quite possibly. So, I mean, this is another thing. Maybe this is just a natural disaster, which is possible. But again, for me, that doesn't really answer the screams that we still get from those caves. The talk of ghouls and undead nasties, that doesn't quite fully answer it. But yeah, it's the fact that this might have just been a natural disaster. I think we can't rule it out. Okay, let's go to James Horner. Also asked about, and this is not just James, also Anon42, asking, what is your take on the lack of suspicion by people in the Seven Kingdoms about the Tower of Joy? Three knights of the Kingsguard were protecting it, and only one was guarding the king, and none were guarding the pregnant queen and the prince. However, nobody in the story seems to find this odd. We as readers know why they were there, but almost nobody in the story does. And Anon42 says, why did Prince Rhaegar seem to have several members of the Kingsguard as his personal retinue, following him around far from the king? Why would King Aerys be okay with fewer bodyguards, particularly as he became more paranoid? That aside, why didn't Aerys order Sir Gerald, Arthur Dayne, Oswald Went to fight in the rebellion? These are literally the best fighters in the kingdom, and they are sitting out the most important battle of the war away in Dawn. Even if Arthur Dayne hadn't received a direct order, he must have known the king would rather have him fighting Robert instead of sitting around guarding a tower. Okay, so what's going on here with the Kingsguard? Now, my take is that you're right, that the people within the story don't seem to think this is weird. And so I think what we need to do is push ourselves into the story and say, well, okay, what's going on at various times, and why might people not think it's weird where the Kingsguard are at any given moment in time? So when all of this is largely kicking off, what we have is 7 members of the Kingsguard, one or two of whom are, and those being Arthur Dayne and probably Oswald Went, were sort of attached to Prince Rhaegar. And not just Rhaegar, but also obviously his wife and his 2 children. Now, that's not odd in the sort of the history of the Kingsguard. You have 7 Kingsguard. Often you will find that 1 or 2 or 3 of them are allocated to other close family members. The heir to the throne having a Kingsguard kind of attached to them kind of makes sense, and their heir as well. So yes, this, I mean, 2 might seem a bit much, but it's not unusual, and nobody really kind of debated it. If you compare that to the situation where you have the Dance of the Dragons, we've got a couple of Kingsguard over on Dragonstone with Rhaenyra. That's just normal. Nobody really thought that was weird. So that's the situation we have at the start. Then Rhaegar heads off with his 2 guys, and they kind of disappear, and war slowly kicks off, and Aerys is there with 5 members of his Kingsguard, and that's for him and his wife and their child, Viserys. So again, that seems fine. So he keeps them with him for quite a long time, it has to be said, until we get to the point where he suddenly realizes, okay, so this civil war, this rebellion is not going away. And everyone can see there is going to be a massive battle. This is going to be like the big battle of the war. It will be the Battle of the Trident. And he decides, oh, that's it. I need to do something. Aerys decides, I need to do something. I want to put my Kingsguard out there in the field. And also, I want to have Rhaegar back. Rhaegar's a great leader. fighter. So he gets Gerald Hightower, who is the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, but also he's taken quite a serious injury relatively recently, and so he's not the fighter he used to be. So although he's the Lord Commander, he's probably also the weakest link out of the seven. So if you were going to send somebody off, this kind of makes sense. He's got the gravitas, but also he's probably not the best fighter. He sends him off to go get Rhaegar. As a complete aside, we should probably just say this is just another hint of the fact that the Tower of Joy was not, or the where the Tower of Joy was not as big a secret as we sometimes think it is, because Gerald Hightower set off and found it. It's not just Ned who set off to find it and found it. Gerald Hightower did as well, and he gets there and Rhaegar stays there and Rhaegar heads off. Now, that sounds a bit odd on the face of it, but I could certainly imagine Aerys himself, the Mad King, did not seem like the kind of guy to give clear and nuanced instructions. I can well imagine him getting angry and saying something like, go get Rhaegar and make him come back to this war, whatever it takes. Go. That seems entirely within character. So Gerald Hightower could have gone down there and Rhaegar says, okay, I will do this, but you have to stay here. At which point Gerald Hightower honorably has been ordered to do whatever it takes in order to get Rhaegar back. He has to stay there. So Rhaegar goes and joins the battle. Now, we then have 4 members of the Kingsguard then left in King's Landing. 2 of them he wouldn't want to send out before this moment because they're also kind of useful political prisoners is probably the wrong way of saying it, but one of them was obviously Jaime Lannister, and Tywin Lannister had noticeably not joined the war yet, and Aerys knew if he had his son there, that was some collateral. That was some way of perhaps calming Tywin in some way. Similarly, the Martells had not joined the war. And so Lewin Martell, another member of the Kingsguard, is there. He's using him to try, as one of a few different tools, using him as a way to try and make sure that the Martells come into the war. The other way that he's trying to make the Martells come into the war is he summons Elia Martell and her children back to King's Landing. And so they have to come back to King's Landing. So at this moment in time, no Targaryens on Dragonstone. All the Targaryens are in King's Landing. 4 of the Kingsguard are there. 3 are off at the Tower of Joy. But to the outside world, this all seems reasonable. All of these decisions have seemed reasonable decisions thus far. And so Aerys sends 3 members of the Kingsguard off to fight in the Battle of the Trident. Now, 2 of those die. 1 survives, Barristan Selmy, but he keeps Jaime Lannister as a Kingsguard there in King's Landing, thinking, I still need some collateral for dealing with Tywin, because Tywin has now suddenly set out to march on the capital. So that all kind of makes sense. He then decides he has to send away. King's Landing is going to be attacked next. He has to send away his wife and child. And they go to Dragonstone, but he's only got 1 member of the Kingsguard left. And you know what he's like. He's going to keep him here with him. So that's why there are no Kingsguard over in Dragonstone. By this point, 2 are dead. 3 are still down in the Tower of Joy. He probably could have sent someone down there to try and collect them, but frankly, he's paranoid enough and time has run out. Maybe he didn't even really think about it. But as far as the wider world and the rebellion were concerned, they didn't know through this time where the Kingsguard were. if they sort of absent-mindedly thought about it. We get the fever dream from Ned. We shouldn't take Ned's fever dreams too literally, but he does through this. I think it's quite indicative. He sort of says, "We looked for you on the Trident and you weren't there," and it's like, yeah, they were looking to see who was there. 3 of the Kingsguard were there. They thought, oh, okay, well, if they weren't there, they're probably in King's Landing, or if they're not there, maybe they're in Dragonstone. It was just like okay, where are they? So all the way through that, people weren't that concerned about where the Kingsguard were. The only slightly tricky thing would be for Ned to explain, oh, and yeah, so I went and I found Lyanna and she was dead, and there were 3 Kingsguard there. That's the only awkward conversation he has. Nobody else at this point will really care. What they're caring about at this moment in time is we've got a new king. Who's the king going to be marrying? Who's going to be in the small council? What's going on? If they hear those other 3 members of the Kingsguard are dead, that's fine. That just gets them out of the picture. That means that we can appoint our people in there. So that's the only awkward conversation Ned had to have. And that conversation was with Robert Baratheon direct. And for him, the only news he will have cared about will have been what happens with Lyanna. So, yes, I suspect that if people sat down and thought about it, it might seem a little odd. But nobody really did. And I think that kind of makes sense with the iteration of events. Let's go to Roman Lakovets. If the official story at Starfall is that Willa is Jon's mother, why was Edric Dayne told that Ned and Ashara fell in love at Harrenhal? It's a really good question. It's very clear that at Starfall they didn't go with the Ned and Ashara, the full story. Ned and Ashara, that Cersei seems to believe Ned and Shara fell in love, and that Jon was their child, and therefore Ashara committed suicide out of a broken heart, etc., etc. That clearly doesn't work in the Starfall context because they hero worship Ned there. Now, in terms of the Willa story, that seems to be the story that they have hurriedly decided on when they were down in Starfall. Ned says, well, I have to, Robert Baratheon will ask, I'm sure. I'll have to have some name. And they say, okay, well, let's say it's Willa. So that seems to be the cover story that they've got going on there. However, you could certainly tell people who aren't in on the big secret, but are, they know some stuff. You could certainly tell people, yes, so the mother was Willa. However, Ned Stark did fall in love with Ashara Dayne, but it wasn't to be. It was just tragic, that kind of thing. And then you can gloss it over and sort of move on to other subjects. So I kind of get the feeling that Ned just said, I'm not going to talk about this much at all. To most people, I'm going to deny everything, except the fact that this is my son. But I do have to be the one person in the entire world who can ask me and I have to provide an answer is Robert Baratheon. And so what answer shall we agree on? Willa. That seems to me the way that went. Nadia Van Albada, probably mispronounced your name. I do apologize. Thank you so much for the super sticker. I hugely appreciate that. A couple of people saying finally catching Moonman, and a couple of others saying finally catch alive. Fantastic. Really good to see. Okay, so let's go to a question from Gina Z. Saying, hi, Robert, I hope you are having a great week. It's not too bad, actually, thank you. Where are Blackfire and Dark Sister, and will we see one or both of them in the Winds of Winter? Well, as I'm sure you know, I recently did a video on Where is Dark Sister? And I've just written one on Where is Blackfire. So expect to see that in a couple of weeks, something like that. Which obviously means all of this is rather fresh in my mind. Yeah, they are mysteries. These are the kinds of things that George R. R. Martin sets up, knowing that he has to satisfy them. We talk about Chekhov's gun too often, I think, sometimes, but he knows the laws of storytelling, does George R. R. Martin, and he knows that if you talk about these legendary swords and that they just disappeared, particularly if one of them was last seen in possession of of Bloodraven, and we've just introduced Bloodraven, and if the other one was last seen in the possession of the founder of the Golden Company, and we've just introduced the Golden Company, then one or other or both of them has to make an appearance. So where are they? Will they appear? Dark Sister, short version, always spoil my own videos, spoiling the video from 2-3 weeks ago, whenever it was. It was last seen with Bloodraven at the wall. We had confirmation. George R. R. Martin himself confirmed. Friends of the channel, History of Westeros, asked him to his face, did Bloodraven take Dark Sister to the wall? The answer was a clear yes. So Dark Sister went to the wall with him. Dark Sister's not at the wall now. No, Dark Sister is definitely not a Longclaw. The descriptions of them are very different. And the clear implication is that when Bloodraven went north of the wall, ranging, he would have taken Dark Sister with him, which means that either Dark Sister got lost somewhere on that ranging, or it's still with him in that cave north of the wall. So my instinct is that that's where it is, and I think that we will probably see that soon. If you want my tinfoil on this, it's that blink and you miss it, but Hodor dropped his sword outside the cave when he was fighting. There were some whites outside the cave. He was fighting them. He dropped his sword in order to pick up Jojen. And yet we know that he's going to be holding the door, and not just holding the door, George R. R. Martin explains, but actually like fighting people off in a doorway. So if he's doing that, that seems to imply that he's probably going to have a sword. What sword is he going to get? The Children of the Forest don't really have swords. Mira's got a sword, but she'll want to take that one with her. Maybe they'll find one lying around in the cave. So, and a Valyrian steel one, which will be particularly useful. So if you want tinfoil theory, that's how that will show up. As for Blackfire, this is more mysterious, I think, because although it's last seen with Aegor Rivers, and the clear implication is he took it over to Essos with him, and people talk about the fact that he has it in the Dunk and Egg stories. When we get the second Blackfire Rebellion, people talk about the fact that he has it and didn't give it to Daemon Blackfire's heir, which is curious. Now, there might be specific reasons why he didn't give it to that particular heir, but as far as we can tell, there are several more Blackfire rebellions that Aegor did support afterwards, and he didn't give the sword to them either, as far as we can tell. So, again, we're left with the boring option. Did he just lose it? Seems kind of unlikely. Was he holding onto it for someone specific in the future? Now, I kind of teased this in the video, which is coming out in a bit, but I thought it'd be fun to just like unpack this a little bit here. Why on earth would he hold on to it and not give it to any of those Blackfires if he was supporting them? It's not just that, okay, fair enough. Maybe he decided that that one of them he didn't like, he didn't want to support their claim, whatever. But twice, he did personally join the rebellion come across with the Golden Company, fight in battles alongside this heir who would have put them on the throne, and yet Blackfyre was nowhere to be seen. Now, that's a bit weird. So the kind of thought that I had, maybe tinfoil, maybe not, the kind of thought that I had is that what if he's one of those Targaryens who gets dragon dreams? His half-brother Bloodraven certainly is magical. His half-sister Shira is magical. We certainly know that Daemon Blackfyre, who was named John the Fiddler in The Mystery Knight, he had dragon dreams. So it definitely does come down the Blackfyre line as well. You just have to be sort of connected in with the Targaryens. So what if he did and he had some kind of vision, some kind of idea that he has to hold on to this for someone in the future? I find that a fascinating thought. I don't think we've got enough evidence to say, yeah, that's definitely that. But we have to come up with some reason why he didn't support any of the Blackfyres by giving them the sword. Lady Vaughan-Strauss saying, going on your theory, do you think it's possible that the statues in the Crypts of Winter have been penetrated by weirwood roots, which could hold the souls of the dead Starks? Well, first of all, happy name day to you. You sent a message over on Patreon and said no questions, but it is your birthday, so I hope you're having a fantastic day filled with loved ones and fun activities. So that's the first thing, and you did have a question after all. But do I think that the Crypts of Winterfell have been penetrated by weirwood roots? Well, I think it's entirely possible. In fact, very likely that the weirwood roots are around the crypts in some way, because the Crypts of Winterfell they're not, we're not told the exact way that things are sort of angled and stuff like that, but the crypts are underground in the same rough area as the Godswood, just sort of outside the Godswood, which seems to imply if the weirwood roots are massive, then perhaps they might, and if we're right that the weirwoods, the root systems all connect together, this means that they would have to be deliberately going around the crypts, which go deep, deep, deep underground. Now, that's sort of half of the equation. The other half, you say, is that does this work somehow in the sustaining of life through the Starks? It's, I mean, it's a good thing. We don't know exactly how the weirwood trees work. We do know that they do seem to sustain life. They certainly seem to sustain Bloodraven's life in a way. That seems to be connected with the trees. The roots are sort of actually even going through his body. There's one coming through his empty eye socket. So they sort of like kind of grow into and around him. Might something similar happen? Well, it's possible. If the way that the crypts are described, you get like the sarcophagus, the actual place where the bones are buried, and then the statue backs onto it, sat on a chair, backs onto it. So perhaps the roots come in through the sarcophagus and actually into the statue, and that's what's binding the souls of the dead Starks. It's a good thought. We don't know, because obviously nobody's tried breaking apart any of those statues or breaking into any of those tombs to find out. But yeah, it's a good thought. Let's go to Corvus Corax saying, hello, Robert. I've always wanted to know what book or scroll Rhaegar read to turn his life around, and what made him change his mind that he wasn't the prince that was promised. Okay, so this is a reference to something Barristan Selmy was talking to Daenerys about Rhaegar. She quizzed him a lot on Rhaegar and things like that. And Barristan Selmy says this: one day, Prince Rhaegar found something in his scrolls that changed him. No one knew what it might have been, only that the boy suddenly appeared early one morning in the yard as the knights were donning their steel. He walked up to Sir Willem Darry, the Master-at-Arms, and said, I will require a sword and armour. It seems I must be a warrior. So that's him reading something in his scrolls that makes him decide he needs to be a warrior. And the working assumption is that this is him deciding. We also get a reference from Maester Aemon, who said that in his younger days, Rhaegar thought that he was the prince that was promised. So most people tie these things together and say Rhaegar was reading the prophecy of the prince that was promised and thought, that's me. And then look to see, what does the prince that was promised have to do? Oh, he must lead the fight against the others. That means I need to be a warrior. So he tromps out to the yard and says, train me. That's the kind of the working assumption that we've got there. The thing is, we don't know, we don't have written down exactly what the prince that was promised prophecy is, but we do have various snippets. One of those things is born amidst salt and smoke, and he was born as Summerhall was burning down. And as Aemon says, it's the smoke of the fire and then the salt of everyone's tears born amidst salt and smoke. Okay, fair enough. So that seems to be what happened, is that he was reading this and maybe Aemon sort of pointed him. We know that they were in correspondence. Maybe Aemon pointed him towards certain things and then he decided he had to be there, the prince that was promised. But then something changed his mind again, and he decided that it's not him, it's his son, Rhaegar, was the prince that was promised. And we get Aemon tells us why. Aemon says, later he became persuaded that it was his own son who fulfilled the prophecy, for a comet had been seen above King's Landing on the night Aegon was conceived, and Rhaegar was certain the bleeding star had to be a comet. So the best we have for a quote as to the prince that was promised prophecy is born amidst salt and smoke beneath a bleeding star. So Rhaegar obviously thought, oh well, yeah, we can interpret me with the salt and smoke thing, but there wasn't a burning star. There was a burning palace, but not a burning star. But his son, the day he was born, there was a red fiery comet above King's Landing. And he thought, that's it. That's the sign. Now, you kind of understand it because we get, it's fascinating reading if you go back and read the end of the last 2-3 chapters of book 1, Game of Thrones, and the first 6-7 chapters, I think, of A Clash of Kings. The fiery comet, the red comet, appears in every single one of those chapters, and we get a different person seeing it and interpreting it in a different way. That's the kind of feel we get, and that is something George R. Martin plays with, because Melisandre comes to her conclusion that Stannis must be the prince that was promised, because of salt and smoke of Dragonstone. He must be born anew. Basically, this is her making him born anew as Azor Ahai, while the fiery comet is overhead. Dany births her 3 dragons from the dragon eggs, while the fiery comet is ahead. Her metaphorically being born again as this Azor Ahai reborn. So George R. Martin plays with this, but what it's very clear is that people believe that a fiery red comet signals the prince that was promised in some way. Okay, let's have a quick flick through. Lady Vaughan-Strauss saying maybe it landed as a meteorite somewhere that we'll find out about later. I mean, I wondered that, but there's no implication. There's nobody saying, "Oh, we have to follow it." It seems to be sort of going across the sky. So yeah, it's. I don't think this is one that um, will land and we'll get some stuff from. Um, uh, Zach Barrett saying, I just listened to Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka on your other channel, The Well-Told Tale. Sorry, a bit off topic, but could you explain what Kafka-esque is? Keep up the great work. Well, I'm glad, for those who don't know, I've got another channel called The Well-Told Tale, where I narrate classic science fiction and fantasy stories. I'm in the middle of doing an H.P. Lovecraft one at the moment. We've got Conan stories on there. Can't remember what else is on there. H.G. Wells stories, some classic sci-fi, a whole load of stuff on there. But yeah, so Franz Kafka, I think I've got 2 or 3 Kafka stories on there. You will see Kafka-esque is often used. Somebody in the chat will be able to find a proper dictionary definition, but it's sort of an allusion to his writing style, as it were, or the kind of the worlds and stories that he creates, where everything is beyond the control of the central protagonist, often because the bureaucracy and system is against them. So classically, we get the trial where somebody is put on trial, but he doesn't know what for, he doesn't know the systems, he doesn't know how he can get himself out of this. We got Metamorphosis. The protagonist wakes up as a cockroach. He doesn't know how, he doesn't know how he can get out of this, he doesn't know what's going on. That's the kind of feeling, is that everything is just out of your control and often very, very bureaucratic. But I'm sure someone in the chat will have a proper dictionary definition for us. Moonman saying, love your work. My theory's too convoluted or sounds too loony and short. Oh well. Could Mance be planning to bend to Aegon? Why else call himself king? When you say Aegon, do you mean Vagon Yongriff? Why else call himself king? He calls himself king. Well, King Beyond the Wall. This is a weird title, in as much as the free folk, the wildlings, they don't have kings. They don't kneel. They're not kneelers. This is something they talk about. People south of the wall, they're kneelers. They kneel to their kings. The king beyond the wall is more a kind of an honorific. Everybody there has chosen to follow that person. So it's not so much that he has taken on himself this title and said, I am the king beyond the wall. It's that it's been recognized that he's leading the wildlings, or all of them pretty much. And previously, particularly south of the wall, the person who manages to do that is called the king beyond the wall. So I don't think that this is a specific long-term plan that he's then going to bend the knee to anyone in particular. Here we go. Greek Weirwood. Kafkaesque refers to situations that are nightmarishly complex, bizarre, or illogical, reminiscent of the themes found in the works of the writer Franz Kafka. It's often described as oppressive or confusing. There we go. Much more eloquent than I could have said. So thank you very much. Martin S. saying, good evening, Robert. Just came in. You had yourself a haircut, I see. I did indeed. Fresh cut for you. And it's, yeah, it's been a while actually since I had a haircut. A little bit of a trim of the beard too. Maybe we'll grow it back out again over the course of the next weeks. So let's go to Catherine Furseth saying, hi Robert, I really appreciated your extended series on the Faceless Men. However, there is one of many, I'm sure, mysteries of the House of Black and White that confuses me. You talk about the Faceless Men as a religious group with their distinct beliefs that all men must die, that death is a kind of god, I guess. Why then do they have the statues of about 30 gods in their temple? Among them are some really fascinating ones. The Black Goat of Qohor, the Hooded Wayfarer, the Horse God, the Lion of Night, the Merlin King, the Stranger, the Weeping Woman, etc. Is this just to say that, look, our god trumps your gods, like the Dothraki invade Dothrak with their stolen god statues, or is something else going on? Good question. And yes, the first point here is that the Faceless Men is a religion. They were presented on the TV show pretty much as just a bunch of cool assassins with some cool catchphrases, all men must die, and things like that. That's not what the score is in the books. It's very much a religion. The House of Black and White is a temple. People go there to worship. And the kindly man, there are lots of different quotes about this, saying the same thing but in slightly different ways. But I've got one quote here from the kindly man teaching Arya about the temple. He says this: "Our forebears came from 100 lands to this place of refuge to escape the dragon lords who had enslaved them. 100 gods came with them, but there is one god all of them shared in common." Arya then replies, "Him of many faces." She knows that's the name of the god. "And many names," the kindly man said. "In Qohor, he is the black god. In Yi Ti, the lion of night. In Westeros, the stranger. All men must bow to him in the end, no matter if they worship the Seven or the Lord of Light, the Moon Mother or the drowned god or the great shepherd. All mankind belongs to him." So I think you're sort of half right with the Dothraki thing. So what happens with the Dothraki is that when they defeat somewhere, they take their god or the statue of their god and they haul that back to Vace Dothrak, and then they put it by the side of the road. And so the way into Vace Dothrak, the road is lined by these statues of all of these gods that they've captured. And that is very much, as you say, that is, we defeated these gods. These are now dead gods. We're in charge here. That's not quite what's happening here with the many-faced god. So they believe that the god, the many-faced god, is a god that has many faces. And so in the Faith of the Seven, he is reflected in the stranger. In other faiths, he's reflected in other ways, but still it is the same god. It's just that people worship and experience him in different ways. So people come to the temple in the House in Black and White and they pray to whichever god they know and come from that culture. And as far as the faith of the many-faced god are concerned, it does not matter. Arya says, "Oh, I see people light candles in front of all of these, but the stranger from the Faith of the Seven very rarely gets a candle." And the kindly man basically says, "Yeah, but that's okay, because they're all the same. These are just expressions of the one God, the God of death, basically." So that's what's going on there, is that they just think, it's not that their God is better than the others, it's just that people don't realize that their God is the same as other gods. Martin S. saying, "Sadly, actress Michelle Trachtenberg, who played Dawn Summers in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, passed away yesterday, age 39, R.I.P. Michelle." Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. So that's sad. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was an excellent show back in the day. I think, are they rebooting it? Did I just make that up? I don't know. Again, someone will know in the comments. Yeah, that's as well as obviously a couple of people died recently. But yeah, thank you for letting me know. Let's say Zach Barrett saying, "Will George R. R. Martin ever confirm or deny the existence of any god in Game of Thrones?" No. No. It's he's basically said you'll never see a god. But for him, in the same way that I think I've got questions about prophecy and the like in just one moment, in the same way as with prophecy, for him, the more important thing is the belief. And that's what drives people. It's whether the faceless men are right in their worship of theology about the many-faced God. That doesn't matter so much as the fact that that's what they believe and that's what drives them. Similarly, it doesn't matter whether the Faith of the Seven are right in their belief about the Seven. It matters that some people believe that, and that's what drives them. So that's his general take. We're never going to see the gods appear in the story. We will see some obviously seem to, or the adherents of them seem to show more power than others. So R'hllor, certainly, for example, its adherents seem to show greater powers than the Faith of the Seven, or adherents of the Faith of the Seven. But he kind of leaves that to us to try and work out, does that mean that the red god does exist and the Faith of the Seven isn't true? Or is it just that they're better at tapping into a source of magic than the Faith of the Seven are? Let's go to Sir Friend. Happy Thursday, Robert. I'm always concerned, to you too, sir. I'm always concerned, always concerned. I'm always most curious on the geography of Planetos. A great video on what's west of Westeros, by the way. The lands of always winter, Sartorius, Ulthos, etc. I'll never be happy until we get a full map, and we never will. No, so I don't think we will. I may be doing a video at some point, something like what's east of Ashai or something like that. People seem to appreciate what's west of Westeros, so yeah, we'll do another couple of geography ones and see whether that people like them as well. But yeah, we probably never will get a full map. It's probably also fair to say that when George R. R. Martin started writing this, he didn't realize how big this was going to get. He famously thought this was just going to be a trilogy. Yes, he thought this was going to be like his magnum opus. This was going to be his big thing, but it was just a trilogy. I don't think that he was imagining at that time that he would be creating world books and there'd be demand for in-world history books and things like that. And so, for example, on the question of what is west of Westeros, to start with, it does genuinely seem, if you sort of read his comments, it does genuinely seem as if he just hadn't given much thought to the whole issue. It was like, yes, the world's a globe, so you go west and eventually you'll get round to the east. But what's actually there, it's not relevant to the story. He's telling the story of Westeros and some of Essos. He's not writing a story about what's west of Westeros. And he has a few times kind of explained that as part of the in-world immersion here is that back in our medieval times, wherever you were in the world, you had bits of the world that you knew and bits of the world that you didn't know. And you can see that from any of the maps we have surviving from olden times, when you have maps that are very detailed about wherever that particular map maker was from, but then the further you get, then it gets vaguer and vaguer and less like we know that the world actually is, and then you just get bits that are sort of very open, as scrawled, "Here be dragons" and things like that. That's the feel he wanted for this, is that the further away you go, and you can see it when you're reading The World of Ice and Fire, the further away from Westeros you go, and the maesters who are writing this, then the vaguer things are, the more fantastical things sound, the less information we have to go on. And that's the kind of idea that he wants, is that the further away from the center of action you go, the less people actually know. Um, I, I think the other thing I would say is that in terms of getting more, I agree. I don't think we're going to get we did get a map book, what was it called? The World of Ice. It wasn't the World of Ice and Fire. It had a name. Somebody in the chat will know that we did get a map book. I always get a mind blank on something or other, but that didn't go into all of the depths that we might want. But of the things which we're going to have in the future, I suspect Dunk and Egg's not going to show us huge amounts of the world. As far as where Dunk and Egg stayed in Westeros. The Song of Ice and Fire main story itself very probably won't show us much further. Everything now seems to be coming back into A Song of Ice and Fire. Blood and Fire, which is Fire and Blood Part 2, we may get a few tales from further afield. This is where in Fire and Blood Part 1, he actually introduced us to Alyssa Farman, and that's how we got the information that we have now about what is Westeros, west of Westeros. We got the information about those 3 small islands that Alyssa Farman found, and the information that she sort of went all the way round to the globe, and Corlys Velaryon thinks that he saw her ship Sunchaser there. But talking of Corlys Velaryon, it will be semi-canon, but I think that the place we will see the most is what I think is still working on the working title of 9 Voyages, which is the voyages of Corlys Velaryon. And we don't know everywhere that he went, but he went all around the world. He went as far as Ashai, he visited Karth, he went to the Shivering Sea, he went down sort of south towards Sarthorios, places like that. We don't know all the details, but if we are going to get more mapped out, that is, I think, probably the best semi-canon source we're going to get. Roman Lakovets. Why do the Faceless Men kill for payment? How do they know if the person they're hired to kill deserves to die, which is important to them? Well, on that second point, it's actually it's not the opposite, but Arya raises this point when she's talking to the kindly man, and the kindly man gives her the backstory. So the Faceless Men started in the mines of Old Valyria, and what happened, their origin story, as it were. And this is quite dark, all of this, I should probably say, but this is their origin story, and they are a dark organization. They were slaves in the mines of, I keep on wanting to say the mines of Moria, the mines of Old Valyria, and conditions were horrible. They were horrific. It was volcanic area there. They would like break open a wall, and then magma would flood out, and it would just be that their feet would be burning as they touched the ground. Horrible conditions. And they were crying out. The first Faceless Man was one of those slaves, and heard them all crying out. And this is where the start of this many-faced god comes, because these slaves came from everywhere. They were calling out to their own gods. And eventually, he decided to act on behalf of these gods, effectively. And one of the slaves was just calling out for death. They just had enough. And so he gave them the gift of death. And then Arya says, well, hang on a minute. He didn't deserve to die. The slave masters are the ones who deserve to die. And the kindly man says, but it's not about who deserves death, because all men must die. And so this is actually quite a key point here for between Arya and the Faceless Men, which is that one of the reasons why they're like so insistent she gives up her identity as Arya Stark is because Arya Stark has got this moral compass now. Again, it's quite a dark moral compass, but she's got her kill list, and her kill list is there because these are people she believes deserve to die for what they have done. And they are teaching it's not about deserving to die. because all men must die. This is just the gift of the god. It's not about deserving at that kind of level. It's about giving the gift of death to someone. Now, why do they accept payment? Because they do not see death, therefore, as a bad thing. The temple is actually a place where people go to die. There's a pool in the middle of poisoned water, and then when people have made peace with themselves, they take a drink of that, they lie down, and then they slowly drift off and never wake up again. And so they are basically offering this as a gift, and then they're also offering as a further gift if there are others to die, because it's not that they deserve to die, it's just death, and all men must die. Let's go to a question from Martin S. Could the Golden Company have made a difference in show canon, or were they always ludicrously outmatched by Daenerys' dragons? Well, purely in show canon, they were established as a good fighting force that was set up purely to show quite how powerful Dany's dragons were, as if we didn't already know it. Because the whole point is that there's nothing you can do. You can have the best army in the world. If a dragon suddenly comes down and breathes fire on you, you're toast. There's nothing else there. So is there anything they could have done? Well, they could probably have tried a few different things. They could have gone more with the scorpions and the ballistas and things like that. That's something that we know can work against dragons. A lot of the dragon deaths that we know of are from being shot in the eye by a scorpion bolt or something like that. So they could have had slightly different tactics than, I think they did use them in the show, but mostly they were just stood outside of the gates waiting for a dragon to come and breathe on them, which doesn't strike me as the optimal way of taking on a dragon. So could they have? Yeah. But I think that the showrunners decided to use them in a way to show the strength of Dany's dragons rather than the strength of the Golden Company. Beniowski, probably slightly mispronounced that. That the VSZK sound, it's closer to j, but my English voice doesn't make that sound easily, so I apologise for slightly butchering it. Saying, "Hey Robert, finally catching a live stream. Well, welcome. Keep up the amazing work. Thank you very much. Here's a question: do you think the lands of Always Winter and the Grey Wastes are connected geographically?" So yeah, if you go to the north, this is a globe. So although we see it all as a sort of a big long map, you have to kind of wrap it around. It makes sense logically that these things are connected up at the top in some way. The evidence we have for that are the legends that we get from Yi Ti about what happened in the first long night. And basically, although these are just legends and they come across and are remembered in different ways to the way they are in Westeros and other parts of Essos, clearly coming down from the northeast were the others or some other type of bad guy. This led to the creation of the 5 forts, which is an equivalent of the wall, and implies that, yes, they came down in more than one different way. So we don't know because we've not been up there. We haven't seen one. I suspect we never will see that part of the world firsthand in A Song of Ice and Fire. But all of the context clues, I think, suggest the answer is yes. Question from John Greenwood, saying, "Hello, Robert. Hi to you. Interested in your thoughts on the deal Catelyn struck with the Freys to cross the river. I've always thought a king's betrothal was a steep price. Was there truly no other way?" Yes, I mean, this is a steep price. There's no doubt about this at all. Rob's betrothal plus Arya's betrothal, we forget this as well, plus two Freys being fostered in Winterfell. This was a very high price. Now, it's probably worth saying Rob at the time wasn't a king. So this isn't as high a price as it might be considered to be later. But so he's the when he was heading down south, this is before Ned has died, so he is the heir. He's not the Lord, but he's the heir. And what would you expect the heir to one of the Lords Paramount to be marrying? Well, probably one of the other Lords Paramount families. But if not that, then one of the powerful second-tier families. So, which is the phrase. So, is it crazy? It's not crazy. It's not like a ridiculous thing to suggest. It's just like it's a bad political match for the Starks. But that said, yes, this is a very high price. And Rob realizes this. And Cat also accepts the fact that this is a high price. But they think that this price is worth it because they think it will give them the advantage in war. Now, we don't get this exact thought from Cat because we actually speed a little bit past the negotiations. But the reason why Rob had to get to the other side was because they'd got this plan of how to relieve the siege on River Run. This is actually Cat thinking, how do I stop the Lannisters from capturing my family's home? So this for her, and she was, let's not forget, she was going in on her own, negotiating on behalf of the Starks, in her mind, in order to allow them to save the family of her birth. So you could argue that there's a little bit of Cat, and this comes out with Cat, is that she is a clever person. George R. R. Martin consistently tells us that she's clever and consistently shows us that she's clever, but her emotions for her family often cloud her judgment. So I do wonder whether there's an element of that. But if you're going to be more charitable to her, you'd say, okay, what comes from this? And what comes from this is that suddenly the Riverlands back Rob completely. They throw their weight behind them. In fact, they say that now he's their king, which is a massive win for Rob. And they captured Jaime, another massive win for Rob. So we say this is a high price. Yes, it's a high price, but that is the only place they could have crossed. This is the only way they could have done that plan. And the plan worked, and it extended Rob's, it wasn't a kingdom then, but extended Rob's kingdom to include the Riverlands and got them possibly the most important political prisoner that they could imagine. So that's a lot of different angles coming at the same thing. But it's a high price, but I suspect that Rob would have accepted that it was the plan worked and it was worth it. Obviously, he then didn't go through with it, and so the whole thing fell through. But a high price, but possibly worth it. A question from who was it? Reflective Rambling. Hi there, Reflective Rambling. Great to see you. Picking up a question for Zach Barrett. This is a show question. Didn't Grey Worm who was sailing to Narth with poisoned butterflies? Do we know anything else about the area? Yes, so there are poisoned butterflies in Narth. Do we know anything else about the area? We do know a few things. I will come back to. I always try and do this if I can, rather than give you a sort of a waffly, garbled answer. I will come back to this next time, and I will drop that one in to give you a fuller answer about Narth. Talking of which, Charis Ballerina, I don't know if you're there in the chat. I said I'd do that last week with one of yours. I will, but I will do it next time because we're going to be looking at Tolkien, and it was a Tolkien question. So if that's okay, I will answer it, but I will skip it and do it next time. Similarly, Martin S., I know you're out there because you put a question in. You gave a really good question in Patreon about Gil-galad. Again, it's a Tolkien one, so if it's okay with you, I'll wrap that one up and answer that one next week as well. Okay, let's go to question from Sir Friend. Why was the mother of the Stark direwolf puppies so far south of the wall, and how? Where are the rest? There's no mention of them at all, given the amount of time we spent north of the wall. Also, is there any link to the Children of the Forest, given how somewhat magical they are? Best wishes, warmest regards, and to you. Okay, so a lot of random questions connected to these, well, not random, you know what I mean, connected questions. The direwolf that came south of the wall. They're curious. How did this happen? But nobody thinks, although people are saying we haven't seen a direwolf south of the wall for 200 years. It's not that, oh, that's impossible. There's no way a direwolf could get here, because you can get south of the wall. If you go to the west, the far west of the wall, it's pretty treacherous, but there's this gorge, there's this ravine, the river bed that you can follow, which passes by the end of the wall and then comes out in some pretty frozen wastelands in the sort of northwest of Westeros. So that's one way that some wildlings have got through. There's also plenty of rumours of there being tunnels underneath the wall. Gendel and Gorm, who were past leaders of the wildlings, they used that to come under the wall and attack the north, but they got lost in there. And apparently they're still there. These are legends, but the fact that it got there isn't. I mean, yes, it's a surprise. It's there, but it's not how on earth did this manage to do it? It's not an impossible thing. As for the question of mentions of them north of the wall, we do get one. We get a few actually, but we get one very specific one, which is Benjen. Actually, quite early on, Benjen's talking to Jon about Ghost, and he says there are still direwolves. Pardon me. There are still direwolves beyond the wall. We hear them on our rangings, so they are there. And at various times we hear about rangers. In fact, I think it's in the prologue where we get one of the rangers saying, one of the experienced rangers, not Waymar Royce, saying we should build a fire. Fires are good for keeping away direwolves. So there are mentions of direwolves, and direwolves do exist. They seem kind of rare, and also they're not thought of specifically as being magical. They are described basically as being particularly large wolves. It's not that people think, oh, here's a here's a big magical beast like a dragon. There is that kind of aura to them, but they don't show any particular magical powers, except in the warging link across that we see here with the Starks. How did that one specifically get down? I haven't got huge amounts of evidence for this, but when in doubt, blame Bloodraven. Actually, I've got probably can't see it. Fantastic T-shirt here from Sanrixian that I always like to blame Bloodraven. I think that this was Bloodraven deliberately putting those direwolf pups south of the wall because he wanted to get the connection between the Stark children. But talking about this T-shirt, if you watch these live streams and have done for a while, you know I'm terrible at plugging merch. But because I remember, this Sanrixian fantastic artist did this T-shirt. You can find it and other things down there. Should be like a bar somewhere on the page if you're interested in that. And there's also, I would appreciate, I will try if I remember, if you watch this back later, YouTube telling me that I need to do some sort of tagging thing in video. I will try and do that. So could you let me know if that works? Otherwise, I won't bother trying to do it again. But yeah, I will take a note. We're about, an hour and 20 into the stream. So I will try and put that there. Right, I got a bit distracted here. Maura Lee, my favourite mystery is about the others, about their history and the role of these different prophecies about the others and how that will play into the story moving forward. I'm curious about the roles that Bran and Jon will play regarding them, what roles Winterfell will play, and Howland Reed and Lady Stoneheart. Different characters here. What roles will they have vis-a-vis the others? Lady Stoneheart, you said, will it mostly be about getting revenge? I think that is her arc. I think that what is left of her, what is left of Catelyn Stark, is about getting revenge for what happened to her children on the Lannisters and the Freys. And so her arc will end. Whether that means that she will end is a different matter, but her arc will end when she gets some degree of satisfaction on that, when she has gained vengeance in some way for the Red Wedding, and also perhaps when she discovers that a lot of her children that she thought were dead are actually alive. So that's the focus of her story, certainly for the next book, rather than the others. Howland Reed, my instinct is that he is more likely to be focusing in on, as a role, explaining the backstory. So what happened at the tourney at Harrenhal, what happened at the Tower of Joy, things like that. So I think that's his role as much as anything else. As for Winterfell, I have done the series of videos recently. I think I'll do one more on that one, about Winterfell's role, which is specifically keeping the Starks there, keeping the generation after generation, tying the Starks in to the Winterfell crypts, because I think that is a weapon which will be useful against the others. As for Bran and Jon, so Bloodraven thinks that Jon is the prince that was promised, and he will take on certainly some of those roles. The Prince that was promised as Azor Ahai Reborn. I mean, I've been saying this for years. I'm convinced that even after the books have happened, we will still be debating who was the prince that was promised, because there will be various people who take on various different roles within this. Jon will be taking on one of those roles, but particularly I talked about maybe he's the person who will get to blow the horn of winter, because if you think who might have the authority to do that, well, you might think it's the Lord of Winterfell, and I think there's a fair chance he might. I mean, he's certainly already been named the Lord of Winterfell by Robb. he's legitimized him, and he said you're the Lord of the Winterfell in his will. You might think that this is the head of or the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. I'm the horn that wakes the sleepers. That's Jon. He's the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. You may think that it's because this is known as the Horn of Joramun, who's the king beyond the wall. If we accept the fact that the king beyond the wall is not just some kind of hereditary title, this is an honorific for who is it that the wildlings are following. Who are they following? Jon. You could argue that he's the king beyond the wall. You can also make a case with R plus L equals J that he's the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms, who again you could argue should be the person. So I think there's lots of things you could just all bundle in on Jon. Bran is going to be the earthly representative of the Weirwood network, who have been fighting the long game. The humans have been kind of forgetting things and moving on and stuff like that, but not the Weirwood network. So that's what his role is going to be. Gilio saying, can a strong enough warg control any animal, anywhere, anytime? Bloodraven can do it to animals south of the wall despite the magical barrier. Well, we don't know all of the detail. There certainly is a strength issue. There's also a certain amount about which animal you're trying to control. So we get a lot of this from the Varamir Six Skins prologue chapter. He has walked into 6 different animals. He tries to walk into a human and fails because she fights back. Earlier on, we get him talking about, all the different animals, why some are easier than others and things like that. So it's partly to do with and he thinks to himself that if he had, because he's wounded during this chapter, that's quite a crucial point actually, is that he's wounded and is about to die. And so he thinks if he had more strength himself, maybe he could do these other things. So there's a bit to do with the strength of the skin changer. There's a bit to do with the animal themselves. Can Bloodraven do a lot? Yes, he definitely can. Any animal? That bit's not clear. Googly Woogly, great to see you. I've not said your name for a long time. Great to see you back for a live stream. Let's go to question from Commander Ray saying hello, Robert, and of course Dan, the best boy, who is around. I think he's gone upstairs though. I missed the last stream as my own Thursdays have become very busy with D&D, an excellent way to spend an evening. That said, I wanted to talk about my favourite mystery, or rather mysteries, and that being the Tourney of Harrenhal, in particular, of course, the Knight of the Laughing Tree, aka Lady Lyanna Stark, and also the wider mystery surrounding her sudden disappearance. What I mean is why she didn't leave any assurances for her hot-headed brother, like, hey, I'm fine, I'm with friends, because someone saw her. A little bird, perhaps a mockingbird even. Even beyond the Lyanna and Rhaegar angle, there were a lot of things going on in that castle, including a young Howland Reed and a certain woman. Yeah, absolutely. I'll focus in on this one, on the mystery you've got here. Why didn't Lyanna say anything? And I think a lot of this, again, it always helps if we just kind of re-immerse ourselves in the story, and in particular the timings and who is where, when, why, and what. So the story we have is Howland Reed gets beaten up by 3 squires. Lyanna Stark says, you should stand up for your honor. Your honor needs to be defended. You should challenge them. You should fight. And Benjen perks up and says, I can find the armor. I can find a horse. I know how to get hold of these things. Howland says, no, that's not me. Then we get this mysterious Knight of the Laughing Tree appearing, who does defend Howland's honor. And the clear impression is that this is Lyanna, who has taken it upon herself to be looking after. She thinks that she's the Stark, and this is one of her bannermen. She should be looking after his honor. However, as a woman, she shouldn't be entering the lists, but if she has a full armor on, then she can do it. And she does. She defeats the knights. She saves Hammond Reed's honor. All is good. And so a few things connected with this. Very probably, George R. R. Martin has hinted to us to say Benjen got that armor for Lyanna, because he's already said, I can get some armor. And so if she then took it upon herself to do this, where does she go? To the person who says, I can get you some armor. And we already know they're close, her and Benjen, because Bran sees them playing together, the two of them, through the Winterfell weirwood. Going back in time, he sees the two of them playing together. So they're close, those two. He provides her with this, and the armor, and possibly the horse. Now, then we're told the Mad King, Aerys II, he goes, I need to know who this secret knight is. I need to know this mystery knight. He sends Rhaegar off to find out. So what does Rhaegar do? Well, Rhaegar seems like quite a resourceful person. But so he would do the obvious thing. Okay, so whose horse is that? Where's that armor come from? This is what people know these things, is that there are armorers there. There will be lots of different armorers there. The horse people will probably recognize. He will just ask the questions. It's actually not that hard if the stuff has been sourced on site to be tracing it back. And where will that take him back to? That'll take him back to Benjen. And what will Benjen do? Will say, no, it wasn't me. Who was it? It was Lyanna. And therefore, that's how Rhaegar and Lyanna meet. That's the working hypothesis we've got going on here. Benjen will obviously say, so what happened? He came to talk to you. Maybe Benjen was even there. Who knows? But Benjen knows something's going on. However, the tourney ends, and the Starks head off in 4 different directions. So Ned heads off to the Eyrie. He's going off with his best mate, Bobby Baratheon, and they're going to go and hang out in the Eyrie. Brandon heads off to Riverrun, and he's there to prepare for his marriage to Catelyn Tully. Benjen heads back up to Winterfell. He's going to do like this kind of tag team thing with his father, because his father wants to come down for Brandon's wedding, but there must always be a Stark in Winterfell. So Benjen goes up there, says, hey, Dad. His dad then heads off back down south. Where's Lyanna? Well, we're not told, but we're told that when a little bit later she disappears, it's because she was picked up somewhere near to Harrenhal. What we can do, therefore, is make a few educated guesses. She doesn't seem to be at Riverrun with her older brother. Rickard was doing a political game, trying to get or foster these Southron ambitions. He's trying to foster good relations with important, powerful families in the South. And so probably what he said to Lyanna was, okay, you can stay down south. You can also come to the wedding. And whether or not she was actually fostered or whether she just stayed for a bit, somewhere in that region. Now, the most likely place, as far as I can see, is that she just stayed at Harrenhal. She didn't go up to Riverrun. There's no indication she went to the Freys. We didn't hear that she's gone to the Brackens or the Blackwoods. And actually, Harrenhal has just been hosting this, the gathering of all of the great and the good. It was probably a good place for her to hang around, and we know she was near there. So, working assumption she's there. Anyway, at some point, an arrangement was made for her to be meeting up with Rhaegar. He comes and finds her, or whatever it is, and they head off. Who does she tell about this? Because she knows she's probably got a couple of weeks or so. Her dad is coming down south. She's gonna write probably to Benjen, because Benjen already knows half of this story anyway. So she probably does write to Benjen, the person Brandon's going to be angry with her. Ned, he's probably going to judge her a little bit. Benjen has always been on her side. Her father is currently on a horse heading somewhere down south on a road. She can't get in contact with him. So probably, we don't know all of these details, but probably whenever the decision was made to go away, the sensible thing was to write to Benjen. So maybe she even wrote off hoping that her father hadn't left yet, but he had. Who knows? Skipping forward quite a lot, this does help to explain why Benjen went to the wall, why he joined the Night's Watch. If he knew, and he must have known some things, but if he knew about Rhaegar and Lyanna and he didn't say anything, that's enough to make you want to go to the wall, isn't it? You probably feel guilty that you didn't say something, and then the whole country went to war. As for Lyanna, the timing is such that if she's out for like a month and then resurfaces, if she heads off overland, this roughly seems right, heads off overland, goes to the Tower of Joy, resurfaces, what's going on? The whole country by that point is already at civil war. So the timing of this is like, well, what do I do now? Everything's at civil war. Brandon's dead. Rickard's dead. Ned is already marching. Well, Ned's disappeared by this point. He was at the Eyrie, but he's gone off who knows where, probably rallying the North to go to war. And not a lot can be stopped. So when you get yourself down into this situation, you say, well, she probably did tell Benjen. And not telling others actually probably makes sense. Let's go to a question from Mitch Evans saying, no question, actually. Well, thank you very much. Just a massive thank you for the hours and hours of incredible content. Hope you're doing well in these crappy times. Thank you very much. I am doing well indeed. And thank you very much for those kind words. Let's go to a question from Michelle Araimo. So, hi, Robert. I hope all is well with you and Dan. My question is around who taught the Valyrians how to bond or ride dragons. They say they were a people so ancient that they disappeared into the annals of history. I have a few theories of my own. People from the Great Empire of the Dawn, but we know about them, so they aren't too ancient. Or was it a pre-Great Empire of the Dawn civilization, a proto-Ashae people? But the Valyrians came after the Great Empire of the Dawn, so how could a people so ancient teach them? The timeline is throwing me off a bit and would love your thoughts. Okay, so for those who don't know the Great Empire of the Dawn, this is the kind of like the founding civilization in Yi Ti. So when we're talking the Dawn Age in Westeros, that's what we're talking about here in what we now call Yi Ti. And they had the Great Empire of the Dawn, and this is mythical. I think that's the first thing that I would emphasize. The biggest thing I would emphasize about this is that it is described as in mythical terms, in the same way that we get mythical characters like Garth Greenhands down in Westeros during the Dawn Age here, and we have the foundation of House Durrandon with marrying daughters of gods and things like that. That's mythical times. And here, let me just read the I mean, this is actually from the wiki, but it's a good paraphrase of what we've got here. The Golden Empire's first ruler was the god on earth, the only son of the Lion of Night and the Maiden Maid of Light, who travelled in a palanquin carved from a single pearl and carried by 100 queens, his wives. He ruled for 10,000 years until he ascended to the stars to join his forebear. So that's the feel we've got. This is mythical stuff. Yes, there very probably was a great empire of the dawn, but did they rule for 10,000 years? Did they find a, a pearl that was so large that you could you could make a carriage out of it? Did the person at the end of their reign ascend to the stars? Those things seem less likely, but they might signify things. So that's the Great Empire of the Dawn. You also talked about proto-Ashai. My take with Ashai is that I don't think we even need kind of like a pre or proto-Ashai. Ashai thinks of itself as being there from the beginning of days. They already, the people who are there think that they have always been there, basically. So I don't think we need to look for something before then. The issue is just what was before then, and there was some kind of massive empire, kingdom, city-state, whatever it is. We're told that the size of Ashai is big enough to hold King's Landing plus Old Town plus Karth plus Volantis, all of it. We're talking about a population of many millions, like a modern day city. This is huge. So that it's very clear to me that there was somewhere over there a massive civilization. And when you add into that the idea that there are still legends, rumors of dragons off the Shadowlands beyond Ashai, and when you get two kind of like little hints as well in the text, we get Dany was going to go to get knowledge to Ashai before George R. R. Martin changed his mind. That was the idea. She would go to Ashai, she would get knowledge of dragons and things like that. And when Aegon V, Egg, wanted knowledge about how to hatch dragons, he sent someone over to Ashai to send back some pyromancers. So clearly Ashai has knowledge of dragons and things like that. They have an ancient kingdom, empire, whatever it is. I think, for my money, that's where the proto-Valyrians came from in terms of who taught the Valyrians. But also, I wouldn't place too much emphasis on we had this and then we had this and they're different. I think probably you can have the one thing morphing and merging into another. So it's not that we had a Valyrian there on the hillside saying, "What's this thing over here?" And then some wise person turning up and saying, "That is a dragon, and how you can bond with it is like this. Here's my list of things to do." It probably wasn't quite like that. It would have been people from that old civilization were a part of this newer civilization, and they had some bits of knowledge that got passed on. So I suspect it was a lot more fluid. As a complete aside, simply because it's something I've mentioned before, but I really do like this as an idea. I am of the opinion that the person that went to Ashai was Shira Seastar. The person Aegon V sent to Ashai was Shira Seastar, because if you're in his position, you have to go, well, he clearly is now obsessed by how to hatch dragon eggs, and he has to send somebody over there, somebody who speaks foreign languages, as Shira Seastar did. Her mother came from Essos. Somebody who is loyal to the Targaryens. Shira Seastar, she's a Targaryen, one of the great bastards, a legitimized Targaryen. Somebody who understands magic, because otherwise they can send any old thing. sheer sea star. She is by a long way the most likely person who got sent by Aegon V over to Asshai. And that explains, I think, how she can kind of disappear from the narrative. We don't know we hear about her being there when Bloodraven was around, but then we don't really hear anything afterwards. So that's just a working theory that I've got on who that person was. Whether that's going to turn out to be important or not is another matter. I follow that up. If you've seen my Quaithe theory video, I follow that up by saying that I think she is Quaithe, and I think there's a good reasons to believe that that's the case. Lady Pushkin's, not so much of a mystery, but I feel something is off about Tywin and the Purple Wedding, or he didn't know anything but was very relieved at Joffrey's death. Well, this is an interesting one. You're not the first person to have theorized about this, had thoughts about this. I mean, I don't know what the right, because it feels as if people are kind of like, they get this feel that it's quite hard to put their finger on, that Tywin doesn't seem to react exactly in the way you think he should. There's an interesting scene early before the Purple Wedding when we get Cersei and Tyrion and Tywin and Joffrey in the small council, and this is when Tywin basically tells off Joffrey and sends him to bed. Kingsguard take him out. Pycelle sort of kind of like slowly scuttles out afterwards. Cersei starts talking, but Joffrey's not been the model of what a good king should be like there, very petulant. And Cersei sort of half defends him, saying, Robert, his father did teach him that you had to be sort of like, you had to be in charge of things and stuff like that. And basically Tywin just shuts that down and sends Cersei out as well. And then Tyrion's left there. And Tyrion picks up on this idea that maybe Joffrey would be like Robert Baratheon. And he says this, "Not Robert II," Tyrion said, "Aerys III," as in Aerys the Mad King. "The boy is 13, says Tywin. "There is time yet." Lord Tywin paced to the window. That was unlike him. He was more upset than he wished to show. "He requires a sharp lesson," says Tywin. So Tyrion is one of perhaps the most insightful characters in terms of their POV here. And he notices that his father is discomforted by this idea that Joffrey might be a bit like the Mad King, and even accepts the fact that he needs a sharp lesson. So that sets us up to this idea that Tywin, having basically launched the coup, and they didn't really launch it so much as take the opportunity to do the grab, and the Lannister family are now fully in control. The child on the throne is not turning out to be perhaps what he was wanting, and he's a little bit discomforted by this. Now, then people go on and say, well, it's noticeable that he doesn't kind of question this idea that it's Tyrion. In fact, he seems to sort of like think more about the pragmatic things, the practicalities. Well, what should we do? Can we send him up to the wall? He's not ever sort of saying, maybe it wasn't him. He seems to be using this as an opportunity to get rid of Tyrion. And he doesn't seem to be that distraught about the fact that the king is dead and now we've got a new king. And this does seem to kind of work together with this idea that maybe he sees Tommen, quite rightly, as more pliable than Joffrey. He's also younger, so the period of the regency is longer, and we know that he did have plans to be potentially getting Cersei out of the way, marrying her off. Even a thought was to marry her off to Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper himself. Get her out of the way, Tywin could effectively be ruling through Tommen. So, did he know about this plot, the Purple Wedding? I don't think we have any particular evidence that he did, but I think the clear implication is that he was okay with it. He was he. It's not that he didn't go on a huge hunt to try and find who's the real killer. He allowed it to look like it was Tyrion. I mean, Tyrion did look a bit guilty, it has to be said. I have seen some people speculate that maybe he was involved in some way. I personally don't think that's likely. But yeah, next time you read through, pay attention to Tywin and how he's acting around that, because it's a little bit odd. We probably never will get a full answer here, but it's a little bit off, and he's clearly not comfortable with Joffrey. Right. Let's go to question from Ranabem Mitra, saying, "Salutations, Robert and Dan the dog. Who created the Seastone chair? We have accounts of it being brought by mariners from the east, and Maester accounts of it being brought up by the deep ones, especially considering that dotted all across the small portside towns in Westeros are people having webbed/fish-like features similar to the shadow over Innsmouth." I think there's two elements here. The actual factual question, where does the Seastone chair come from? This is the Iron Islands throne, basically, and their legend is this sort of came up from the depths. It was there when they already arrived. Maesters have speculated a number of various different thoughts. Nobody really knows. It's oily black stone. I did a video about the black stone, all the different types of black stone a little while ago, if you're interested in that, which connects it, in my mind at least, to the Isle of Toads, a statue on the Isle of Toads, plus a couple of cities, including a Shire, where we're told that the stone is oily and black and kind of light sinks into it. Now, I've got a whole theory about what that might actually be, but I think for me, the suggestion is that maybe, yes, the Maester who suggested this came over the sea from the west might actually be right. But I don't think it matters. So the deep ones, though, are the second point here. This is a nod from George R. R. Martin to H.P. Lovecraft. He's mentioned deep ones a couple of times. You'll find a couple of times when you get things like in Leng, for example, when you get steps that go down and people never return. That's straight out of Lovecraft. This idea of deep ones and fish-like creatures which come up from the sea and have children with human women, that's straight from, you talked about the shadow over Innsmouth. Absolutely, that's pretty much the plot of what's going on there. George R. R. Martin does do this. He does little hat tips to fantasy authors that he likes. There's those who well, I'll let you go and speculate on whether they are there. There's a lot of them also around. House Peak is one of my favorite examples of where George R. R. Martin is doing a little hat tip to an author that he's a big fan of. But here with Lovecraft, the mentions of the deep ones, I don't think we're going to meet the deep ones. I think it's like the gods. I think that this is just something that he's saying. Yep, I wish to give you a little nod. Right, little question. I had another question somewhere. Roman Lakovets. Also, why did Edric continue to squire for Beric after becoming Lord of Starfall? Shouldn't he get home and rule? It's a good question. So Edric Dayne is he's the eldest son and heir, and then becomes Lord of Starfall. Before he's Lord of Starfall, he becomes the squire to Beric Dondarrion. Beric Dondarrion, we know. The sort of the interesting link here is that Beric Dondarrion is engaged to a Dane. Now, I've said, I think on one of my shorts over on elsewhere on this channel, this actually is a really interesting point. Why Ned trusted Beric Dondarrion to be leading that group of soldiers out to go and hunt for the mountain. He didn't, as far as we're aware, know Beric Dondarrion before then. However, the Danes clearly trusted him because he was engaged to someone from House Dane. The House Dane, they put their son there as his squire. And as far as Ned was concerned, if it's good enough for House Dane, it's good enough for me. So that's just like a little bit of backstory. Why didn't Edric head back to Starfall? I mean, I think the short answer is that he hadn't been released, and then it was a time of war. So he got caught up with the Brotherhood Without Banners. Just him trying to head home across the Riverlands would have been an incredibly dangerous journey. He's still relatively young, Edric Dayne. He is one, I think, he is one of the members of the Brotherhood Without Banners who, when Lady Stoneheart took over, has kind of split off. And I think now he's probably going to head back down to Dawn. I think it's just a sort of a delayed reaction rather than a decision to stay away. Let's go to Oranabe Mitra, who's saying, was Bran the Builder also the last hero and also the Night's King? So many fantasy tropes involve the idea of defeating an enemy by essentially joining their ranks. The last hero ended the long night. Bran raised the wall and the Night's King ruled from the wall and found his corpse queen. They are surely the same person. And could the Night's King's tale be wrongly time-stamped? He ruled during the long night and not after it. The last hero had a group of 12. Those 12 people and himself could make him the 13th Lord Commander. So yeah, interesting speculations. I come back again to this idea that George R. R. Martin, I don't come back to it because I think it's important, it's because George R. R. Martin tells us it's important, that these stories from the Age of Heroes are legends, and we should take them as seriously as we take legends in our own world, which is to say there's quite possibly truth there somewhere. Maybe some of it happened, but we shouldn't take them all as literal truth. For me, trying to sort of say, well, this bit here, add this bit here, add this bit here, it has its value, but we'd always have to kind of take the step back and go, does that kind of fit thematically? So, does this fit thematically that Bran the Builder could be the last hero and the Night's King? Possibly. It's I'd certainly go with your idea that the timings on the Night's King might be out of whack, just slightly wrong. It certainly seems an oddity that on the face of it, what happens is that the others are defeated. The Night's Watch are created, the others are defeated, and then the wall is built, and then 13 Lords Commanders later, suddenly we get this, what looks like a female other appears. It's a bit weird, isn't it? But we also have to say some of the other timings just seem a little bit weird. We're told that the Night's Watch of the people who were fighting in the first long night, but that we kind of think of them as being set up to, we are the Watcher on the walls, that kind of thing. They're on the wall. So maybe those two bits of timeline don't quite add up. If I had to guess, then yes, this kind of makes sense that we could have some kind of cult of the others appearing a significant period of time, but not ages away in the future. We certainly know that we get people like Craster effectively worship the others. The cold gods, he treats them as gods, and so the idea that perhaps you could get a Lord Commander of the Night's Watch who does that, it kind of makes sense to me. The fact that also ties in with the fact that we've got the Horn of Winter there during this story because Joramun's there, and we've got Winterfell, which seems to be well established by this point because we have Brandon the Breaker, we're told, who seems to be a different Brandon, who is the Lord of Winterfell at the time. That kind of idea that the Night's King happens a bit after, a couple of generations, 2, 3, 4, maybe up to 10 generations later, but still within kind of like not eons time of the original Long Night. That kind of works for me. In the same way, if you're a Tolkien fan, we're talking Tolkien next time, but if you know of The New Shadow, which was the abortive attempt Tolkien made to do a sequel to The Lord of the Rings. If this is entirely new to you, by the way, though, I did a video on that as well. But he got about 13 pages in. He tried 3 times to start writing this, and basically it's set a couple of 100 years after the events of The Lord of the Rings. We're a couple of generations later. There's just 1 or 2 people there. The main character that we get in this is this guy called Borlas, who was very young at the time of the Lord of the Rings and is now very old, and so he sort of says, I can remember the smell of evil, and all around we just start getting this idea that we've got people they've forgotten quite how terrible orcs and Sauron and all of that stuff was, and they're setting up these cults. That's the kind of feel I have with the Night's King. It's like the others have gone, but generations later we get people who sort of turn that into a cult. So that's the kind of feel I get for it. William Schneider saying, hello, Robert. I think one of the biggest mysteries is what happened at Summerhall. Did it begin the new age of magic and reawaken the others? And could it have the answers of how to stop them? Hopefully Sam has time in the libraries to find these answers. Yeah, I agree. This is one of the big mysteries, and it's a deliberate one by George R. R. Martin. If you've read The World of Ice and Fire, you'll find this is the most blatant effort by George R. R. Martin not to spoil future books. The future books, in this case, being the Dunk and Egg stories that he said will go all the way up to the end of their lives. In that he basically says what happens at Summerhall. It burns down. No one who survives really wants to talk about it. We do have a note from the maester who was there, but he knocked an ink pot over and then it just ruined the paper that it was on. And so we only get a few random words. And it's like, come on, George. I mean, you know what you're doing here. We know what you're doing, but still, that's frustrating. So this is a deliberate mystery set up by George R. R. Martin. Lots happened. Regardless of any of the other things, lots happened. We get the king dying. We get the king's eldest son dying. We get Dunk dying. We get the dragon eggs seemingly disappear. We get Summerhall, the palace burning down. We get the birth of Prince Rhaegar. So we get a new king, a new line that we're going to be having here. Coming up, and lots is happening. To add an extra layer to say that this is kickstarting the new era of magic. I entirely understand it. I suspect if you hunted hard enough, you might be able to find an old video where I speculated on this several years ago. It's possible. But we do have to remember that the magic didn't work, or at least it worked in a way that people weren't expecting it to. By which I mean that we get, in an early Dunk and Egg story, in The Mystery Knight, we get John the Fiddler, the Blackfire Pretender, who has these visions of a dragon being hatched. And it turns out that actually that is just Egg, and the sort of the revelation of Egg, a Targaryen. And that is sort of foreshadowing for what happens at Summerhall all those years later, is that they're wanting to hatch dragon eggs. They're doing all of these things to hatch dragon eggs. We have fire, we have pyromancers, some magic stuff going on. Do they hatch dragon eggs? No, they do not hatch dragon eggs. But as far as we're aware, anyway, that would be a big twist. But Prince Rhaegar is born, so a dragon is metaphorically hatched. And this is done through sacrifice of king's blood. Aegon the king dies, sacrificed in the flames. His eldest son, who had been heir to the throne, he wasn't heir to the throne at that time, but he had previously been heir to the throne, dies. Dunk also dies. Dunk is not a king himself, but if you go to the Hedge Knight and later, you see quite how obsessed he is by this idea that the heir to the throne died for him, for his foot is the thing that he often sort of gives it to, because we had the big fight, the trial by 7, which was over his honor and to prevent him from losing a foot. And in that, a Targaryen, the heir to the throne, Baelor Breakspear, dies. Spoilers, but the book's been out for a long time. So he thinks, what is it about me that means that a prince should die for me? Which makes him figuratively going around, how is he going to be matching this in some way? Is he going to save the kingdom in some way? So, sacrifices, fire, and the birth of a dragon. So, for me, that's probably enough, without then adding on an extra layer of, and on the magical realm, they achieved some other things. Perhaps I'll talk about timing and stuff in just one moment with another question. We can't rule it out, but I don't think we can rule it in until we get some more information. Charis Ballerina. In the original drafts of A Feast for Crows, it's revealed that glass candles can hold souls within them via blood magic, granting a type of immortality. This reminds me of Weirwoods. Do you think, correspondent, thank you very much, 2 super chats here. Do you think this will ever appear in the books? Could there be plot or thematic relevance to a fire magic equivalent to weirwoods, like we have the fire whites, etc.? I mean, this is curious. I've not looked at the exact quotes, if we have the exact quotes. I always find myself in two minds when it comes to early drafts that George R. R. Martin clearly decided not to include in the book. And I came across this when I was looking at a video which will come out, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks' time. I've reworked my my video on who is young Griff, Aegon the Sixth, Aegon, whatever, and also where is Blackfire, and a conversation happens there in a chapter that George R. R. Martin read out when he was writing A Dance with Dragons, that doesn't happen in the actual chapter we finally got to read. And I'm always in two minds about that and things like this that you're talking about here. Do we take the fact that it's not in the final draft as evidence that George R. R. Martin changed his mind and decided, actually, I'm not going to go that way? Or do we take it as evidence that that's what he wants to do, but he decided to save it for a later point? And I think it's a bit of both, really. So the idea glass candles can hold souls within them. They have to get their magic somehow. It is Valyrian magic, and all Valyrian magic is through fire and blood, which means that there has to be fire and probably some degree of sacrifice. And so a person, you could argue their soul, their spirit, or whatever, could be captured within that. So it kind of makes sense to me. Will that have an impact on the story? I think probably not. I think glass candles will be important, but the exact mechanism for them and a person gaining some kind of immortality by going into a glass candle, I'm guessing not, partly because I think the knowledge of how to make the glass candles will have disappeared unless the Citadel have kept it somewhere. There is a way that we might get something on this, though, which is House of the Dragon. Ryan Condal, the showrunner, said he's got a blog. He's a nerd about props, film and TV props. That's his thing. Everyone's allowed a thing. That's his thing. He loves film and TV props, and he's got not a blog, a podcast about it that he does. And sometimes he obviously talks about the things in House of the Dragon, because that's what he's responsible for ultimately. And he said in his most recent podcast that there will appear in House of the Dragon season 3 an item that has not yet appeared on screen, is in the books, but has not yet appeared on screen, either in Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon, which has led to speculation. He could be talking about Vigilance, the House Hightower Valyrian Steel Sword. It's possible, but the way it was phrased makes it sound more like it's a thing, and perhaps we're talking glass candles. And so people have speculated who might have a glass candle. Is there any chance Helena could? Helena, they're using as an all-round, yes, dragon dreams and things like that, but now also she seems to be able to hack into Daemon's weirwood visions as well. So she seems to be an all-round magical person, as opposed to just like somebody who gets a few words of prophecy every now and then. So we do not know this, by way of update. We do not know the extent of George R. R. Martin's involvement in any rewrites of House of the Dragon season 3. We know by clear implication he was not involved in the early drafts because he then came out with his blog posts where he was very critical and made a point of saying that while he was in London, he did not go along to the writing meeting, wanting to distance himself from it. After which everything went a little bit quiet, and the clear implication has to be that they will have had to take account of what he says. Because, of course, if the writer of the books and the creator of the world comes out that strongly against something that is not yet written, let's not pretend he was coming out against things that were being considered for season 3. If he comes out that strong, they have to take account of that. Now, we do not know the extent to which that means his involvement has ramped up. My instinct is it probably hasn't, which to bring us back, but it probably hasn't, but they have taken account of his thoughts. To bring us back to the glass candles, I think this probably means that he's not got an input into the glass candles. So I don't think we're going to get much by way of extra officially sanctioned law in the same way that he basically confirmed, or it was confirmed, that it came from him, the idea of Aegon's prophecy vision. That was quite a long way round to answer that question, but I hope that helped. Let's go to Mary Lou Gambit saying, I'm curious about Tywin's brother and the Lannister sword. Yeah, I mean, this is a fun mystery. So this is Gerion, possibly Gerion. We think Gerion Lannister, who is Tywin's youngest brother and Tyrion and Jaime's favourite uncle. Now, there's a great conversation that we get between Jaime and Jenna Lannister, Jenna being the sister, the Tywin's sister, indomitable woman, a great character. And she goes through like the siblings, and she says how they each coped with Tywin, basically. And you get Kevin, and she says, Kevin, well, you know what he's like. He realized early on what it was going to be like, and so he just made himself. He made himself a place next to Tywin. He would become his right-hand man. Gerion, his way of coping with this was to laugh, to jest, to joke, and that meant that Tywin found it quite hard to deal with. But the kids loved him. Tyrion in particular, he was taught tumbling by his uncle Gerion. Now, he went off on an adventure. Actually, not that long. We don't know the exact date, but probably a decade or so before the events of A Song of Ice and Fire, he went off and said, I'm going to go to Valyria to try and find Brightraw, the Valyrian steel sword of House Targaryen, which had been lost there after the Doom. King, not King, but the Tommen the Third, maybe. I'm not entirely sure. Somebody can fact check that one. But one of the Targaryens took it upon themselves to go to Valyria and see if they could get treasure and stuff. They took Brightraw with them, and then they didn't return. And Gerion then, just 10 years before our story, decides to go off and hunt for it. He disappears. Tywin obviously sort of tries to find out what happens. He got as far as, I think it was Volantis, and then all of his sailors said, well, we're not going to Valyria. And so he had to change he get some slaves to be on his ship. And they, as far as we're aware, carried on to Valyria and did not return. So what happened? Well, there's lots of weird and wonderful theories out there. By quite a long way, I think the most likely is simply he went to Old Valyria and died, because that's what happens when almost everyone goes there. So the George R. R. Martin has been pretty good at showing us that trying to go to Old Valyria now, it's just you won't return. You will die. It doesn't matter who or what you're going there with. You will not survive. That's really important, because he does have one character who claims to have been there and come out, and has got some Valyrian goodies to prove it, which is Euron. But if we didn't have a whole host of other people who'd gone in there and not returned, then we wouldn't think that it's quite that crazy. We just thought, yeah, okay, fair enough. As it is, this is being used. That's not the whole reason, I'm sure. Literally why Gerion existed and did that. But it does help us to set the bar for how crazy Euron is to have gone there to start with, but also how much of a mystery it is that he could have returned. Do you believe, this is Jewel Elson, do you believe in the story about the Red Lake and Brandon of the Bloody Blade? Or are you in doubt and inclined to blame someone else entirely? I have to admit I've not looked into that one recently. I will take this one as one of the ones I will come back to next week. So I think that's got me two that I'm going to come back to. I hope that's okay. I don't want to give you a waffly answer where I don't actually have anything. P.S. Please say Higa Herga and Googly Woogly. Very happy to. Excellent usernames both. Right. Let's go to Lady Pushkins. What does Bloodraven actually want Bran for? He lures him to the cave and Bran will learn things and enhance his Greenseer powers, but then what? Defeat the others ultimately, or put a powerful Greenseer on the Iron Throne, or both? And why did Bloodraven never leave the cave? Do you think he couldn't due to the Whites and therefore had to work through Warging and through the Weirwood network? Yeah, I mean, you have to remember he was quite an old man at the time he got there. And although he seems to have been in good health for a long time, I think there's a point at which he probably decides, this is it. I'm going to stay here for a bit. We don't know all the details of how he got into that cave, but we do have a clear idea that he sat down, because this happens to Bran. He says, here's your Weirwood throne. Sit here. You'll grow used to the dark. Don't worry about it. The dark will be your friend. And Bran sort of goes away and sort of like actually raises, he's quite scared. He talks to Mira. Am I going to die here? Am I going to stay here forever? And that clearly is what Bloodraven just decided. He's an old man. Why not? This is how he's going to learn. He's going to have to commit a few years here anyway in which to learn all of this stuff. So I think this was entirely voluntary on his part. I don't think they sort of bound him to that Weirwood throne and just sort of kept him there against his will. I think he arrived and he said, I need more power. I want more knowledge. I will get that by staying here. So what does he want from Bran? Well, the language suggests that he kind of sees Bran as being the person who is not his replacement, but the next in this kind of line. Now, we often get caught up. I'm trying to be careful with my language here, because we often get caught up with this idea that the Three-Eyed Crow or Three-Eyed Raven is a job title, and then it's just like, I'm passing this on to the next one, because that's where the TV show went. That's not the case here. This isn't a job title to be passed on. However, when we see the wider cave system, we see it's not just Bloodraven who's there hooked up to the Weirwood network. there's children of the forest all over the place who are in the same situation. And Bran looks at them through Hodor's eyes, and some of them look like they might be dead. Some of them look like they might be just alive, but only just. And when we get Bloodraven, we get this clear impression that he is being kept alive by the Weirwood Network, and he is being kind of sucked up into it. He has to kind of take breaks when Bran's there, when they're teaching. It's Bloodraven who's there. Oh, I have to, I need a break now. So it's almost as if he knows that his time is limited. He's going to get sucked up. He's going to turn into one of those children of the forest who are there just like hooked up. His spirit and soul will be there. But ultimately he and his freedom of action is going. So part of this is just the normal, organic, another person, because there aren't many children of the forest left, and he's been kind of casting his net wide, and he's found one to do this. But also, you do have to wonder whether there's an element of foresight here. If he is getting Bran, because Bran can now move, if Mira drags him or if Hodor carries him, he can head back down south. Is this something that Bloodraven has foreseen? I think quite possibly. We don't get huge amounts from him, so it's hard to sort of work out all of his plans here. But clearly, part one is to train up Bran quickly. He trains him to be warging. We kind of skip over this because we think so much about the Weirwood tree and all of that, but he trains him to be warging into birds, more than one bird at a time. He says, you can be in lots of different beasts at the same time. Teaches him all of that stuff, then teaches him about how to go through the Weirwood network, and then he says you're not going to be bound by the trees in the future. So basically, he's telling him all the secrets of how to be a greenseer. And if he has some kind of foreknowledge that Bran will have to go south, he is just imparting what he knows. Pardon me, which means that we get to this, depends on your perspective, wonderful or slightly disturbing possibility that actually what Bran is going to become is Bloodraven. Bloodraven is going to be imparting to him all of his knowledge and his teaching, and Bran is at such an age when he's going to be taking this on board. So Bran may well become the Bloodraven figure in this generation. Adam Geets saying, "Hi Robert and Dan. My favourite mysteries of A Song of Ice and Fire are what happened that caused the White Walkers to come back." I'll quickly talk about that, which is we don't know because we haven't been told. But how long they've been back for, I find the fascinating one, because if we figure out how long they've been back for, then we might learn a little bit about what triggered them to come back. And what it appears is that they've been very active just this last few years. This is what prompts Osha to be heading south, for example. It seems very clear that whereas we've had a few Night's Watch people abandoning their posts recently, nobody had. This was a big surprise. When we get the others in the prologue, it's like, well, what's going on here? There'd been heard no whispers of that before. So whatever is kind of the ramped up it quite recently. However, they seem to have been around for a good few years before that. Mance had been sort of growing into his position of power and authority partly because of this movement of the others going on. Traster seems to have had his arrangement or I mean, arrangement's the wrong way of saying it. He's been treating the others as his cold gods for quite a few years now, maybe a couple of decades, maybe even more, who knows. So they seem to have been around, but it's only recently that they've been ramping up their appearances. Also, what did Adam Velaryon learn during his stay on the Isle of Faces? Um, well, this is a fascinating one for me. You also asked about what the end goal of the Weirwood Network, which I've sort of partly covered already. But let's talk about this Adam Velaryon one. So this is in the Dance of the Dragons. So we will see this at some point in House of the Dragon, I'm sure. The extent to which we see this is the fascinating bit. At Tumbleton, two of the dragon seeds switch sides, Ulf and Hugh. And Rhaenyra then becomes obsessed with this idea that the other two dragon seeds will also switch sides. Nettles is off with Daemon. She doesn't need much convincing that Nettles might be up to no good. But the other one is Adam Velaryon. And Adam Velaryon's like, what? And what have I done? I'm not like them. But she orders him basically to be arrested. He gets tipped off and gets on his dragon and flies off. And where he flies off to is the Isle of Faces to consult with the Green Men. This is weird. Why would this person who grew up in the docks of Driftmark and then was flying a dragon, why would he think, I think I know where I'm going. I'm going to go to the Isle of Faces. I'm going to go and consult the Green Men. That's a really out of character is probably the best way of putting it. We don't know enough about Adam Velaryon in the books to know any more, but without knowing anything, that's completely out of the blue and weird. He consults, we're told, with the Green Men, and then he flies around various castles gathering an army and takes that army off to Tumbleton and attacks the army that's there. So basically, the strategic position in the war is you've had this big army heading from very slowly, it has to be said, from the Reach, from Old Town, Hightower armies heading up. They've stopped at Tumbleton. It's got a bit complicated with Ulf and Hugh because they're now. Oh, actually, do I want to be king myself? I'm not necessarily here on Team Green. That whole conversation started happening. But this is at the time, what appears to be the big threat to King's Landing. If they push on a little bit further, they will get to King's Landing. And so Adam Velaryon gathers his army, pushes back, self-sacrificially takes on the dragons that are there, and stops them. And the upshot of his action is that he dies, his dragon dies, but the army gets pushed back. Lord Peake holds up his hands and says, okay, well, this isn't working, is it? And he takes his army back home. So then somebody takes his body to Raventree Hall, home of House Blackwood. Why? We don't know. All we know is that it was retrieved from there after the war and then buried elsewhere. So this is odd on many levels. It applies, obviously, House Blackwood have got a link across with the old gods and weirwoods and things like that. But all of this is just a little bit strange. I think this is one of those ones that we have to say George R. Martin has created a mystery. We can speculate around it, but until we know what on earth prompted him to go there in the first place, we're really none the wiser. What is intriguing for me that we can perhaps now draw out is the fact that what clearly the result of this, of him going there, was to go and fight for Team Black and prove his loyalty. So perhaps the Green Men said, yes, you wish to prove your loyalty. Have a pep talk, be true to yourself, go and show you prove yourself. And but that doesn't seem to ring true. What we do have in House of the Dragon, not in Fire and Blood, but in House of the Dragon, we have the Weirwood network seemingly coming out for Team Black, inasmuch as Daemon was shown a series of visions which prompted him to throw himself behind Rhaenyra. So it seems, if you add that, semi-canon, but if you add that to this consultation with the Weirwood network, it seems as if the Weirwood network were Team Black. It's just a working hypothesis. Then let's go to a question from Andrew Biederman. My favourite mysteries are prophecies, specifically those of Patchface and Maggie the Frog. Maggie, because of how they seem to be spot on accurate and how easily understandable they are as prophecies go. Patchface, for the opposite reason, in that they are much less easily understood and it's unclear for most of them if they are even real prophecies. Do the differences between them mean anything for how reliable prophecy is in this world? Well, for those who don't know the Patchface prophecy, so the Maggie the Frog prophecy is the very clear one about Cersei, and it seems to have come true quite accurately. Yes, you won't marry the Prince Rhaegar, you will marry the King Robert, you will have 3 children, she did, he will have 16, he did. So those things all seem to be coming true. Patchface, a court fool for House Baratheon, who came over from Essos. Then the ship he was in got caught in a storm. Everyone was drowned except apparently him. He was washed up on the seashore. A few days later, apparently dead, but then spat up a whole load of water and seemed to be alive. However, he was changed, and now he's not the same jolly old fool that there was before. He wanders around, jingles bells, and says really strange things, like fool's blood, king's blood, blood on the maiden's thigh, but chains for the guests and chains for the bridegroom, I. Now, it's a bit weird, but you can, looking back, see that sounds like he's describing the Red Wedding, because he's saying fool's blood, fool at the Red Wedding was killed. King's blood, Robb Stark killed. Blood on the maiden's thigh, there is a wedding which was consummated. Chains for the guests and chains for the bridegroom. Again, this is what happened. So the prophecies of, and that's probably the easiest one to interpret, it has to be said, out of all of the Patchface ones. Other ones seem very open, and it's entirely possible that we will look back on some of them and go, oh, that's what he means, because looking forward from that wasn't clear what was going on there. The setup had to be right for the Red Wedding in order for us to understand that. So what does this say about prophecy? People see things and interpret them in their own way. Seems to be what's going on here. And so we get, classic example, Melisandre sees things in the flames and she interprets them in her own way. She may not be right in her interpretations. Even she to herself accepts that, but that's what she puts out. Patchface probably sees stuff in this kind of like weird underwatery way with lots of bubbles and things like that, and then tries to say it, but it comes out in a very kind of garbled way that most people don't even know is prophecy. Maggie the Frog says stuff that is absolutely true, but even then Cersei seems to be completely mistaking it. She's, or more to the point, this is coming straight back to the classic thing for George R. R. Martin. It doesn't matter so much in terms of the plot. It matters less whether something's true and more whether people believe it to be true or how they interpret it. The Valonqar thing is important for the plot, more for the fact that Cersei becomes convinced that's Tyrion than actually us trying to work out who the Valonqar might be. The younger, more beautiful person who's going to be casting Cersei down, taking all she holds dear, she's interpreted that as Marjorie, and that has impacted on the plot hugely. So it's a matter of interpretation. And the tragedy perhaps for Patchface is that nobody is interpreting his. Nobody's there going, although Melisandre thinks he's very sinister and probably thinks he should be killed. So she can see that there's something going on there, but most people don't at all. This is all a part of the bigger idea of that clearly prophecy works. And as a sort of an addendum to this, when you take a step back and look at the big picture here, George R. R. Martin uses prophecy way more than most other fantasy series. Way more. Many fantasy series have like a central prophecy about, here's the promised one who's going to come and save the world, whatever. Some have some bits of prophecy here or there, insights into the future or something. Here, you can easily lose track of how many people have some kind of prophecy. We've talked about two just there. We've got the House of the Undying that Dany visits. She also gets stuff from Quaithe. We get the Ghost of High Heart who's going there. We get the Prince that was promised prophecy. We get Melisandre seeing things in the future. All over the place, we get these bits of prophecy going on, and it's easy to lose track of the fact that there are so many, and it does make you wonder, is George R. R. Martin trying to tell us something about the nature of time within his world? In that it's not just like here's a random guess about what might happen. Prophecy clearly does work. People might not see it correctly, people might not interpret it correctly, people might not believe it, but prophecy is real. Maggie the Frog and her prophecies were real. What does that mean about the nature of time? Does that mean that everything the ink is dry on everything? Or does it mean that people no longer actually have free will and volition? These are actually quite big questions when you get into it, but I think it's beyond doubt that he uses prophecy way more than most other fantasy authors. Right. I think that's me caught up in the chat, but we've got a few more questions from my patrons. We get Shelley J saying, hello, Robert. Thanks for everything. Your content is a real bright spot. Thank you very much for saying that. This may be more tinfoil than mystery, but I'm inclined to believe that Mushroom is an ancestor of Tyrion. So the mystery is, how did Mushroom enter the Targaryen bloodline? Well, I don't know. First of all, I don't know whether you deliberately said Targaryen there, or whether he meant to say Lannister, but obviously there is a big theory that Tyrion might be a Targaryen. Yeah, I think this is tinfoil, but fun tinfoil. Is there a way that a Mushroom could perhaps be in the Targaryen or the Lannister bloodlines? Well, it's possible. I mean, if you believe all the stories that he says, it's definitely possible. But I think you have to remember that the Dance of the Dragons happened around the year 130. The story that we've got at the moment is around the year 300. So we're looking at 170 odd years, several generations apart. So perhaps, but if so, it kind of skipped quite a few generations. But let's go to a question from Buster. I'm curious what lies in store for the sword Dawn, or Lightbringer, if you will. The fact that Dawn is unique from Valyrian steel, which is already a threat to the others, makes me wonder, how will it be used? A keen edge in capable hands is always appreciated, but I assume its future role is to be more complex. Might it perhaps be a light for Azor Ahai in dark places where all other lights go out? That's Galadriel sort of quote you're doing there. Love it. Uh, yeah, this is an interesting one. So for those who haven't kind of picked, this is actually it's the thing behind me. They didn't do a particularly good job of it on the TV show. They did at least make an effort. Arthur Dayne there holding the sword Dawn, the ancestral sword of House Dayne. But unlike other ancestral swords, a few things first. This is not Valyrian steel. This is made from a meteorite, the metal from a meteorite which fell to Earth. This makes it thousands of years old, not hundreds of years old, like most of the Valyrian steel swords that we know of. And also, it's sort of milky white in color. And then also, this is not just passed down from one generation to the next, and whoever happens to be the ruling lord gets to use it. You have to be worthy in some way. We're not told the exact criteria that are used here, but you have to be worthy. So sometimes it sits there back in Starfall and nobody uses it for maybe even 2-3 generations or so. It is there now. There is not a current worthy Dane. Arthur Dayne was the last to have that right, and they get to call themselves the Sword of the Morning. Now, people have speculated over the years, or not even speculated, they've pointed out the obvious things here, which is it is called Dawn, the Sword of the Morning. That feels very much like the kind of thing that you might want against the long night. You want dawn, you want the morning. This is thousands of years old, may well have been around during that time. It is made from a white meteorite. We're told that a black meteorite fell and was worshipped by an emperor back in the time of the Great Empire of the Dawn, the Bloodstone Emperor, and a black meteorite was worshipped, and this brought about the first long night. So this is white meteorite contrasted with black meteorite. There's so many things that it's just like, oh, so the hints here are that this is connected in with ending the long night. And there is a sword which is connected with ending the long night, which is Lightbringer. So might this be Lightbringer? Possibly. The light in places when all other lights go. We're not told whether it glows. We're sort of told it's milky white color. I think we would have been told if it glowed. We certainly would have been told if it had a flame on it, which Lightbringer apparently is supposed to have. So this doesn't exactly match what we're looking for, but it's clearly going to be important. My best take is it's going to be brought into the story by Gerald Dayne, so Gerald Dayne, Darkstar, who's going to claim it, and then he's probably going to head over to join Aegon, the sixth Aegon's new rule over there, try and join the Kingsguard, kind of an echo of Arthur Dayne serving in the Kingsguard. So that's how it will enter into the story. However, it kind of makes sense for it to end up with someone, maybe even Dany, who knows, and then be used in the fight against the others. As much as I like this idea that this is going to be Lightbringer possibility. I don't think it's going to be the only Lightbringer possibility. In the same way that I said, I think that after all the books are finished, we will still be arguing about who Azor Ahai Reborn is. I think we'll also soon be arguing about what Lightbringer was, which sword was Lightbringer, and this will be one of the candidates. I have got one more question from my patrons. And now's a good time, therefore, to drop any more questions into the chat. I'll try and pick up a few of them. Alexander the Just Okay saying the areas below Bloodraven's cave where there are other children of the forest hooked up to a weirwood network. What's with this? What are they doing and why? They certainly aren't telling Bran the full story here, and I wonder why. I mean, I think I sort of covered this a bit earlier, but they seem to be greenseers in our language, our way of thinking, who have hooked them up to the weirwood network, and the weirwood network sustains them. It keeps them going, and probably well beyond their natural lifespan, but only just. And they are getting more and more sucked up into the weirwood network. So what are they not telling Bran? In this respect, I think it's that, yes, his initial thought and fear that he would, the idea was that he would stay here forever. There's a ring of truth to that. But I don't think that this will necessarily happen to him. I think he will escape. It does make you wonder whether there might be something similar under the Isle of Faces. We don't often talk about. When you think of the Isle of Faces, we think of weirwood trees, but it's weirwood tree roots that people tend to get hooked up into. So is there an underground there? Is there a cave system there on the Isle of Faces where there's a whole load of these old children of the forest hooked up? It's entirely possible. Caius Ballerina, what do you think the others do with Craster's kids? Why do they accept sheep and dogs? Are there ice sheep running around now? So you can go a few different ways with this, but with Craster, I think the important thing to note is that this isn't an arrangement he's got with them. He's not got a contract. He sometimes sort of talks about it a bit like that, but no, he just leaves out a child or a sheep or whatever, and the others take them and leave him alone. Now, I suspect he discovered this by accident. We know he doesn't want male babies, and he just took one of them out, heartless as he is, out into the forest to die, and then he sees that it gets carried away, and he thinks, actually, this is a sacrifice. Here we go. I'm not being mean-spirited and just killing things. I'm offering up sacrifices to the gods. What do they want with them? Well, it's very hard to say because we haven't been told all the things yet by George R. Martin, or even a tiny fraction about the others, what they want, how they operate. But as far as we're aware, they animate dead things. So presumably, if they got a dead sheep, a live sheep or child, they would kill it and then animate it. That seems to be the extent of it. Now, obviously, what happened in Game of Thrones was that they went away and turned those children into, well, baby others. This did happen, I think, in season 4. So when George R. R. Martin was a little bit closer to all of this, and we've certainly not heard him scream and shout about it, which he could have done. But it did open up a whole raft of questions. Okay, does that mean if we get a baby other, does it then grow up to be an adult other, or does it always stay that? Does this mean that all of the others are just humans who've been changed? We did not get an answer to any of that in the TV show, it has to be said. I mean, we got some things we could kind of infer from what we saw, but we didn't get any real answers. So I think on this, we're waiting. I think the default answer, if we didn't have if we didn't have the TV show, I think the default answer we would all have is, well, they're just taken as sacrifices, and they might be killed and reanimated. Because of the TV show, we have to put an asterisk there because we don't know if that bit came from George R. R. Martin or not. But it's it's possible. Question from Charis Ballerina: will it matter that someone that hates Jon has joined Summer's wolf pack? Odell passed his hate on to Varamir and One Eye in the pack. Could it tie into another abandoned plotline that Bran and Jon would become bitter enemies? Oh, this is interesting. So, for those who missed it, and it was quite easy to miss it, you get Varamir Sixskins appears in the intro chapter, the prologue for A Feast for Crows. Sorry, Dance with Dragons. And in that we find he has 3 wolves, and in that we find out who they are, what they're like, and he goes off into one of those wolves. I think it was One Eye, and we see through Bran how when Summer is very hungry, he smells some meat. He goes to see what it is, and he finds these 3 wolves there who are eating this meat, and he basically takes them on and wins. And they have to sort of bow to him, and so he gets the meat. And they then, it's not entirely clear, but they sort of like become his. Well, he becomes their pack leader, basically. Now, we don't know how that has played forward, whether that has played forward with. And sorry, I should just to be clear. So those 3, that is definitely Varamir in there. Now, we don't know how that plays forward, whether that is Summer is now that's pack. We don't have lots of extra details of what follows on from that. Odell passing his hate to Varamir is an interesting one, because this is Odell was the skin changer, the wildling skin changer with the eagle. And after he died, he went up into the eagle and that had his second life there. And basically what happens, we're told, is that if you go up, once you die as a skin changer, you can go into your bonded animal and you can survive there for a while, but after a while you will slowly diminish. However, he Varamir goes in and takes over the eagle, and because of the close bond, that means some of what Odell feels washed into him, and so he has this irrational hatred of Jon, which kind of plays out through the story. So what does this matter if this then if we get Varamir in a wolf that is part of a pack that Summer's in control of? My instinct is that Summer and Bran are stronger than Varamir, and so actually this won't make huge amounts of difference. I like the thinking, but whereas we might still get echoes of this going on to the future, I don't think this is going to lead to Bran then hating Jon. Right, let's have a quick flick through the chat. Akatosh Ray saying, if we think Dawn was the OG Lightbringer, would that imply that all the named swords have a deeper meaning beside their names or behind their names? If so, what would Oathkeeper imply and Widow's Wail? Well, is there a deeper meaning? So Dawn is the original Lightbringer. This is thousands of years ago. So you could name the sword thousands of years ago as a very specific meaning. I think the clear idea is that the original owners of these Valyrian steel swords hundreds of years ago named them for things that they thought reflected the house in some way. So ice at House Stark makes sense. Bright roar, lion's roar. That's a Lannister thing. Oath Keeper is clearly the flip of Oathbreaker for Jaime. So that's what's going on there. Should we see some kind of deeper meaning behind all of these? Well, I think George R. R. Martin likes playing with that as a literary technique. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. But I don't think we should be playing some kind of complex linguistic game to see how all of these things particularly tie together because of their names. Some of them, vigilance for House Hightower, we may find have some particular meaning. So House Hightower, the implications, they're watching, they're waiting, they're ready to guide the way. Vigilance keeps hold of that idea, but if there is a connection between them and the wall, the long night, or something, having vigilance as their keyword is important. Julian Ivanov, I'm sure you've covered this at some point, but how do you think Jon's identity will be revealed? I mean, yes, I've covered it in many different ways, but I think it will be revealed not to everyone all at once. I think that's the key thing. The two big options, it's the same we had on the TV show. The two big options for the third book only one are Sam discovering something down in Old Town, or Bran going to the Tower of Joy and finding out what happened. In reality, I suspect this is the third thing, which is the book only thing, which is Howland Reed. Howland Reed is he's the secret keeper. He's the person who was there with Ned. He knows everything that happened, and he is the person, the witness that can be there to say, "Yep, that's Lyanna's last words. This is her baby with Rhaegar. I talked to the guys. I know this for a fact. This is what's going on." He's the person who can tell people and tell Jon, and he may well even think that that's his responsibility now. With Ned gone, with Benjen disappeared, Lyanna's obviously dead, Rhaegar's dead, and now suddenly we've got the others on the move. He may think actually it's time. It's time he finds out. And now he will turn up. George R. Martin has said he will turn up. He didn't turn up earlier because he knows too much and he would spoil the plot. So my instinct is that he's going to be the person who tells Jon, and then this will get confirmed by Bran and or Sam. Callie Summers suggesting that the widow of Widow's Wail might be Cersei. Yep, that's a good shout. Andrew K saying, to me, it's possible that Dawn is another version of Dragonsteel. Comets often mythicized as dragons, for one, but perhaps the black blood sacrifice versus a Valyrian Steel version emerged later. Yeah, it's entirely possible this is like a different version of the same kind of technology. And Kirsty Angel saying the Lannister sword Bright Roar literally translates as Light Bringer. Yeah. I don't think that is Light Bringer, but yeah. A Dream of Spring will reveal the advent of glass candle mass media. That would be fun. And Desert Storm born Charlie 11. Good name. It'll be revealed on Jon's first name day after resurrection. They'll be singing the Happy Name Day song, and they'll get to Dear Jon, and Sam will be like, actually, your name's not Jon. I like it. A happy way of doing these. Andrew K saying on Game of Thrones, it seems like there are only 12 or 13 others when we saw them readying themselves for the battle. So maybe they were not making new others from the babies. Well, I mean, your guess is as good as mine with that. That felt like one of those plot lines that they started on and decided, nope, that's too much. We're not going to go down there. Okay, I think with that, what we will do is say next week we will be coming back with Mysteries of Middle-earth. So we'll do a Lord of the Rings focused one next week. We've got a few questions on that one already, which kind of roll over from here. But coming up over on the main channel, what have I got coming up? Weirwood Trees video coming up tomorrow. And what else? The Fagon video. Is Fagon really Aegon the Sixth? Is he a Blackfire? Is he someone else? That video is going to be coming out in a week's time. Also, a week's time, maybe a couple of weeks' time. Also, who is the Valonqar? We touched on that this time. That's another video I've got coming out quite soon too. So I've got lots of stuff coming out. I hope you're as excited by it as I am. But if you are watching back this on YouTube a little bit later, there's going to be appearing around here a link to other live streams that I've done. Appearing around here is a link to my Patreon page, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. I think I said a massive thank you to my moderators right at the very beginning of the live stream and haven't done it since then. So moderators, thank you. You do an amazing job. If you're there in the chat still, do give them a little bit of love before we all disappear. And then secondly, I always try and thank my patrons. Thank you, patrons. You are amazing. Okay, that's all for this time. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again soon.